people still joining?
The attendees count has stopped at 77.
All right. So let's begin.
Let's begin.
Good morning and welcome to the May 6th meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And it's a wet and nasty day outside for much of Oregon, but glad we're all here inside, warm, dry, and ready to tackle some important issues. We've got a very, very full schedule for today, several informational presentations, several decision items, and we are scheduled to take a 15-minute break at 11:30 with wrap up to come at 12:15. So let's begin with a roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. And for the record, Councilmember Farrell will not be in attendance today. She has been excused from today's meeting.
All right.
Councilmember DeFantorum. Chair Hall.
Present.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mena.
Here.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Here.
Thank you.
So that does constitute a quorum of sitting council members. Now we have public comment. We have 4 people who have signed up in advance to offer public comment. I also want to acknowledge a couple of written comments that were received from Melanie Stanley regarding gaps in funding sources available to middle-income wildfire survivors, and also a testimony about the proposed rent increase process. Now let's get to those folks who have signed up for public comment. Lorraine Santana Park. Is Lorraine on the line?
She is on the line. She is muted.
Okay, so Lorraine, if you're hearing me, please unmute your microphone and we'll bring you in for public comment. Well, let's come back to Lorraine, and in the meantime, how about Peter Hanley?
I do not find Peter online right now.
Okay, Robin Smith.
I do not have a Robin Smith online right now.
Shannon Vilhauer.
Hello, I didn't register to testify. My apologies for the confusion.
Okay, who's this?
That was Shannon.
Oh, okay. One more call. Lorraine Santana Park. Okay, well, we'll move on with the agenda then. And
We do have one participant that has raised their hand.
okay.
Emily.
Okay.
Hi, I did register for public comment. I don't know if it was, maybe it wasn't received in time. It's Emily Lieb with Metro.
Okay, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Hall and members of the Housing Stability Council. My name is Emily Lieb. I use she, her pronouns, and I manage Metro's affordable housing bond program and policy efforts. I submitted some written testimony to you this morning, and I'm here to share that testimony for consideration in your discussion of the draft allocation framework for LIFT and Housing Trust Fund. Metro is incredibly grateful for the collaborative conversations we've had with OHCS's rental housing team over the past months to explore creative and holistic solutions to our shared challenges. And we appreciate the opportunity to test a coordinated model for allocating HTF and LIFT in partnership with OHCS and our local implementation partners. The City of Beaverton, Clackamas County, City of Gresham, City of Hillsborough, Home Forward, Portland Housing Bureau, and Washington County. Layering these resources with local bond funds will reduce pressure on private activity bonds and contribute toward addressing cost escalation gaps while ensuring that limited resources are prioritized for 30% AMI units. While we are supportive of this overall approach, we would like to share some considerations regarding the proposed allocation framework. For context, the current pipeline of locally approved Metro bond projects includes 20 projects comprising 2,322 new apartments, which include 808 that will be restricted for households earning 30% AMI or below. The pipeline currently requires over $400 million in private activity bonds for projects scheduled to close between 2022 and 2023. And we anticipate a need for an additional $400 million in private activity bonds between 2024 and 2026 for this pipeline. In addition, our pipeline currently faces a collective funding gap of over $75 million, a gap that will continue to grow if projects are delayed due to lack of PAB capacity. We know these challenges are not unique to the Metro region and appreciate OHSS's role in balancing needs across the state. With appreciation for the broader landscape, I'd like to offer a few considerations for your discussion today. First, the framework proposes to direct $5 million to lift-only projects in the Portland Metro region. With the significant strain on PAB resources, we urge the Stability Council to ensure that all funding directed to the Metro region be prioritized for projects serving households at 30% AMI, where we know the need is greatest. Second, in order to best support flexibility to address a full range of needs across the regional portfolio, we recommend that funding set aside for our region be available to all projects with local voter approved funding. And finally, it's our understanding that the 50-20-25 split for rural, metro, and other urban areas was determined prior to the emergence of our current PAB and cost escalation challenges. Given these significant shifts in the funding landscape over the past 6 months, we would encourage the council to reevaluate this approach and consider moving toward geographic allocation formulas informed by need rather than historic precedent. And a few metrics for your consideration: 53% of Oregon renters of color live within the Metro jurisdictional boundary, and 42% of Oregon very low income renters live within the Metro region. I want to reiterate my gratitude for the hard work of OHCS's staff and our continued partnership to find systems level solutions that center racial equity and prioritize the needs of households with very low incomes. Once the allocation framework is approved, we look forward to working with OHCS and local partners to direct these resources in a way that aligns with state and local goals and commitments. Thanks for your consideration and the opportunity to share these thoughts today.
Thank you, Emily. Do we have anybody else who wants to offer public testimony? Last call.
There are no more hands raised, Chair Hall.
Okay, then we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is mortgage interest deduction audit report. And this agenda item is part of an effort to keep the council and the public updated on key audits involving the agency. In recent meetings, we have had some discussion of the Secretary of State's audit of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is still ongoing. Today, we're going to hear an audit report summary of an audit report on the mortgage interest deduction. And we've got a team of 3 folks from the Secretary of State's office. And I would like to ask you, please introduce yourselves and take it away.
Good morning, Chair Hall. My name is Kip, and council members. My name is Kip Mehmet. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Audit Director for the Secretary of State's office. I'll go ahead and introduce my two colleagues here in the interest of time. Olivia Raqued is the Audit Manager on this important audit, and John Bennett, who you'll be hearing mostly from, was the lead auditor on this project. I'll just get us going here. Good morning to you all. And I forgot to mention my pronouns are he and his. I really want to thank Andrea and all of you for your time and attention. You know, a key to audit impact, which is the only reason I'm really in this crazy business, is to really have impact out of these audits, is to get our information out to people who can do something with it. And this council hopefully can do something with this and other work that we're going to be producing and maybe even have in the past. So we're always willing to come here and answer questions and provide our work. So thank you for your interest today in this work. You know, we have shared values, as you mentioned, the audit we have right now with the great department that is led by Director Bell. We have a collaborative nature out of this audit shop. We're here again to work together to provide information from our swim lane with other experts to move the state forward. We're not a gotcha audit shop. We're really about moving the needle forward for Oregonians. And I have, as I said, the privilege to work for Secretary Fagan, who has really doubled down on a couple of strategies we have and values that I think this audit we're about to present meet, which is one, really a commitment to equity auditing. We view ourselves as a national leader. There's a lot of work to do and a lot of growth for us to do, but looking at equity through government services and enforcement actions on the other side of that. And we're also really interested in public trust. With all the mis, dis, and malinformation out there, we believe auditors, with our rigid methodology and our nonpartisan offices, can really still have a place in the public square in providing objective information. And that's another reason we want to get out, present, and answer questions about our information so we can get that out there. So public trust and equity are huge milestones for us. As an example of that, we've done a lot of work recently in education and disparate equity outcomes in that space. We're about to issue a report next month, really looking at systemic statewide issues in that regard. And I'm so pleased to say that the Governor's Office, Department of Ed, and State Board of Education and legislative leadership are all supportive of that report. So we're hoping that will move things forward. But let's get to the soup du jour today, tax policy. This is a specialty from Secretary Fagan. It's innovative. No other state auditors are doing this, though we're sharing our work with state auditors who are getting a lot of interest in this as well. And the mortgage deduction interest audit was one of the most important audits we've done in recent memory. It really is emblematic of the additional work we're going to be doing in tax policy. We're strongly considering a tax property assessment and other appraisal audit coming down in the future sooner than later on equity with an equity lens as well. But let's get to John Bennett here. I know we only have brief time to make this presentation on a pretty complicated tax policy, but you know, one thing for auditors is we gotta get it in bite-sized nuggets for everybody. So hopefully we're able to do that for you today. John, one last thing before I turn over to John. We're not going to probably get to all of your questions today, but we stand ready offline to answer any questions or to take any comments. So I know Andrea can facilitate that if you need to get a hold of us after the fact. So again, thanks for having us. And John, please take us through the presentation.
All right. So as Skip said, I'm John Bennett. I was the lead auditor on this project. And I guess I'll just get it going. So this was an audit of the Department of Revenue, and the title of the report was "Without Legislative Action, the Mortgage Interest Deduction Will Remain Progressive and Inequitable." I want to start off by just giving a bit of an overview of why we did this audit. This was a focus area for Secretary Fagan, and it was added to our 2021 audit plan, and also incorporated our sort of annual risk assessment process. And then at a different level, the mortgage interest deduction is a significant investment that the state makes every year. It has a revenue impact of more than $1 billion for the 21-23 biennium. It's the largest housing related tax expenditure that in the state each year, and it's the 8th largest tax expenditure overall. And a report from the legislature a couple years ago identified it as the largest housing subsidy in the state. I want to do a real quick background on what it actually is, and also what a tax expenditure is. So Oregon statute defines a tax expenditure essentially as any sort of benefit or item that exempts people, types of income, services, or property from the sort of established tax base. the mortgage interest deduction. It's one of nearly 400 tax expenditures in Oregon. Just technically, it's an itemized deduction that's available at both the federal and the state level. And it lets people reduce their taxable income by the amount of mortgage interest they pay every year. But because it's an itemized deduction, you have to have these itemized deductions in an amount greater than the standard deduction to actually benefit from the mortgage interest deduction. So with that little bit of background done, here's some of what our audit objectives were. So we wanted to first determine the distribution and equity of the mortgage interest deduction in Oregon by income, race and ethnicity, as well as geography. And the other thing we wanted to do is determine the current level of review the mortgage interest deduction is receiving and who should be accountable for assessing its effectiveness. So I'm going to jump right to the results by income. We got the full data set of 2018 tax returns from the Department of Revenue, and they also provided us with their revenue impact calculations for these. So these dollar amounts in here are essentially the amount of taxes collected that would have been collected if the mortgage interest deduction didn't exist. That's the way they model this. So as far as the distribution by income goes, we broke it out by income percentile. And it's not equitably distributed by income. The highest income Oregonians receive the greatest share of this deduction's benefits. 60% go to individuals in the top 20% of income levels. And then kind of a takeaway from this chart, I know I got a lot of numbers in here, but taxpayers, that roughly 17,000 taxpayers in the top 1% of the income distribution receive more benefit from the mortgage interest deduction than the entire 40%, the bottom 40% combined. So it's concentrating at the highest levels of income. Another way we broke this down was just what that average benefit is per taxpayer. And you can see a pretty dramatic increase here as well. One area I kind of like to compare these to is the fourth 20%. So that's taxpayers earning about $57,000 to $100,000. Their average benefit is about $311. And then you compare that to the average benefit to the top 1% at $1,138. It's more than 3 times as much on average. We also looked at it just the average mortgage interest deduction benefit for people who actually claimed it and received any benefit at all from it. That's the far right column here, and a similar pattern is emerging. And again, taxpayers in that fourth 20% are receiving less than half of taxpayers in the top 1%. So based on this analysis, we determined that it was inequitably distributed by income, and it is a regressive tax expenditure because it's providing the largest benefits to the highest paid taxpayers in Oregon. We also looked at the mortgage interest deduction by county using the same data from the Department of Revenue. And again, and we found that the mortgage interest deductions benefits are disproportionately accruing in urban areas. This map here really just shows a ratio of the percentage of mortgage interest deduction benefits to the percentage of taxpayers in each county. And the darkest colored counties are the ones that are receiving where that ratio is greater than 100%. So these counties are receiving a disproportionate share. We also did this work by adjusted gross income in the counties and found that urban counties were receiving a disproportionate share by the amount of income that their county generates. There are some factors in here. House prices are going to be higher in most of the urban areas, as well as incomes are just generally higher in urban areas as well. So there's some other there's some factors going into that as well. Last, we wanted to take a look at the distribution of the mortgage interest deductions benefits by race and ethnicity. And we ran into a pretty big stumbling block in this, in that the Department of Revenue doesn't collect race and ethnicity information on tax forms. So we couldn't get the same sort of level of clarity as we could to look at it by income and county. But we didn't want to give up. So we instead used some other data sources, primarily the American Community Survey, and understood that you have to own a home to benefit from this, and its regressive nature also indicates that higher income individuals are benefiting at greater rates. So we pulled American Community Survey home ownership data, and in Oregon, white individuals are much more likely to own their homes than individuals from any of the other race or ethnicity groups that the census tracks. So it's pretty stark in most of these examples. White individuals in Oregon are more than twice as likely to own their home as Black or African American Oregonians. There's a 20% gap across most of the rest of the groups, and these hold by ethnicity as well. So Hispanic or Latino Oregonians are far less likely to own their home than white Oregonians. And then similarly, because we knew that these benefits mostly are accruing to individuals that make more than $100,000, we looked at the share, the percent of households that earn more than $100,000 across these the same race and ethnicity groups, and found a similar pattern as well, where white individuals are considerably more likely in many cases to have incomes at this level. So based on these two factors, we were comfortable concluding that the mortgage interest deduction is disproportionately benefiting white Oregonians as well. We couldn't put a dollar figure or a percentage on it, but based on these two data sources, we were comfortable making that conclusion. I wanted to highlight just some criteria that we used. Oregon's income tax statute at the very top says that Oregon's income tax system should be equitable and fair, and that policies should be evaluated based on several guiding principles, including ability to pay, even distribution, and efficiency. And it directly states that Oregon's income taxes should not be regressive. But based on this work that we did, we found that the mortgage interest deduction doesn't really meet these standards in statute. One thing I want to highlight, because you guys are a board associated with OHCS, we met with some of the OHCS certified home ownership centers across the state to get a little bit of a non-numbers look at the benefits of the mortgage interest deduction. So we met with 7 different home ownership centers, their staff, to learn what the primary barriers that their low to moderate income prospective home buyers were facing. And they told us the primary barriers were limited funds for down payments, sort of high prices in the current market, and credit issues. I'm sure none of this is news to you folks that are living this work every day, but it was good for us to hear it directly from the people who do the work. And all but one of them, all but one of these 7 centers told us the MID was not an effective tool to address any of these barriers at all. And it follows logically as well. I mean, you have to have a house to even benefit from the mortgage interest deduction. It doesn't address these key barriers, especially the down payment tool. You don't get any of this money in advance. And I wanted to highlight one quote we heard from one of the centers. They told us that, I can't think of a single client that the mortgage interest deduction has ever made a difference for. So, so that was really useful information for us as well. Couple other things, the mortgage interest deduction, the way it's designed is what's leading to these regressive outcomes. Because it's an itemized deduction, higher income taxpayers are just going to benefit from it at a greater rate than lower income taxpayers are, because higher income taxpayers are more likely to itemize their deductions. They're going to own more expensive homes, so they're going to have larger mortgages with larger interest payments. And then they also pay a higher marginal tax rate. So for every dollar that gets deducted for a higher income individual, it's leading to a greater tax reduction because of that. So I have a table in here. It's in the report, but I'm not going to dive too much into it. But it's really the design of this deduction that makes it regressive. We wanted to look into the legislative purpose a little bit. There's this sort of myth that the mortgage interest deduction was created and intended to promote home ownership. There's no evidence of that in either the Oregon statutes or federal statutes. It's existed since the federal income tax was created, and really is just a blanket deductibility for all types of interest. And over the years, the different types of personal interests that are deductible have been whittled down, but the mortgage interest deduction has remained. So this deduction was never designed to promote home ownership. And there is no clear purpose in statute, either at the federal or the state level, for what this is actually for. And in their response to the report, DOR noted this lack of purpose for tax expenditures is not an issue unique to the mortgage interest deduction. For our second objective, the mortgage interest deduction really doesn't receive any state level evaluation at all. There's a biennial tax expenditure report that identifies all of these tax expenditures and provides evaluations for some of them. but they don't evaluate the deductions that are related to the federal tax code. Oregon also has a really cool biennial tax credit sunset review process, but the mortgage interest deduction isn't a tax credit, so it's left out of that process as well. And our conclusion on this is this really limits the transparency and limits the ability for limits accountability for the mortgage interest deductions regressive outcomes, and limits decision makers and the public's ability to really make a fair determination on whether this is a tax expenditure that they would like to see continue in the future. So I'm going to end with our recommendations. I won't read this whole thing out loud, but we made our recommendations to the legislature and not to DOR. And they're relatively simple. We would like the legislature to define a clear purpose in statute for the mortgage interest deduction. And if they need to make some changes to how it's designed to meet that purpose, we would like them to do that as well. And then we also think that they need to identify a state agency that'll be responsible for regularly evaluating this deduction to ensure that that purpose is met once they've established one. So that's the whole thing. I didn't keep a check on time, so hopefully I didn't go too far over. I don't know if there's time for questions, but as Kip said, if anybody needs to reach out, here's mine and Olivia's email information. You can also, find our names at the end of the report and reach out. So please reach out if you have any questions or anything else about that night. And I really appreciate the opportunity to present this work to all of you.
Well, thank you very much for a really meaty, information-packed presentation. I'm sure all the council and our constituents will want to review it and have some follow-up. I'd like to just briefly, if I could, ask you to kind of circle back to, as I mentioned in the beginning, that the Secretary of State's Audit Division is also currently in the process of auditing the Emergency Rent Assistance Program. And if I could get your thoughts on what the approach is to undertaking this audit, especially knowing it was a historic program in terms of size, scope, and resources for the agency.
Absolutely. Great question. I'll be brief and happy to follow up, and we can come back and keep this council updated on that audit and where we're at on it as well. Obviously, a lot of legislative interest in that. Probably the main reason we are doing this audit is because we requested by many legislators to take a look at this. But to your good point, Chairman, we're not here to bayonet the wounded, and it is something that it's around a program that was a point in time, as you said. So what we're going to try to do, working closely and collaboratively with Andrea and her team, is get some real objectives about go forward lessons learned, or other kind of, one is back to that public trust, is helping to tell the story of what really happened here. There's a lot of emotion and different, takes. So we want to put things in context, and we want to say, hey, here's what happened. And then whatever happened positively, where we can provide assurance, and maybe things to look for in the future, we'll note that. But it's a very good point in terms of it's a moving target that's actually already moved. So we'll have to make sure whatever our recommendations are really applicable to whatever goes forward in the space. And again, we'll be looking collaboratively. A step our office does with our recommendations that a lot of auditors don't do is we actually have a specific meeting to talk to agency folks after we have agreement on our findings. We agree there's a finding of a certain situation, then how are we going to mitigate this? And so we will again be leaning in with our partners over at the agency to figure out where we have agreement on improvements that we find reasonable and feasible ways to go forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Higginbotham.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. It was great to get that information. I had two questions, one of which was answered. My one question was it designed to address low income or to even look at our equity? So you've answered that in the recommendations section. But my other question was about the numbers from like past bienniums. Do we have any of that information to compare to see if that needle has moved at all, or just curious to see what that looked like?
Yeah, so we did our deepest dive in just looking at 2018 specifically, but part of the Department of Revenue releases the biennial tax expenditure report, and while they don't evaluate the mortgage interest deduction, they do provide a quintile income quintile breakdown of the distribution of those benefits, and those have been, I think I only went back to the 2007 biennium in those, and that breakdown has been included so you could see. And I don't have it right off the top of my head, but it's been very close to 60% of the mortgage interest deductions benefits going to the top 20% of taxpayers, about as far back as you can go. And it's been roughly $1 billion a biennium in revenue impact since the 2013-15 biennium.
And the same, I'm assuming the same moving forward, or do you know what anything past 2018 looks like?
No, we don't, because there's a bit of a lag in getting that DOR data, but they do. But based on these sort of design issues with it, I can't see it without some changes in the way it operates, mitigating its regressivity.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
I want to acknowledge that Councilmember Interim has joined us, and also to recognize Councilmember Lee for a question.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you for this presentation, and deeply, deeply appreciative of this work. I cannot say enough about the overt and explicit and unapologetic focus to center racial justice and equity. So I just express my gratitude to you. I want to say a couple of things for our council here about this. I look forward to diving more deeply into the numbers, and it's pretty clear. It aligns with what I think many of us might have assumed was the situation. And now we have some data to back us up, which I hope is the spur to action for us. And I want to come at this at a little different angle. We talk a lot about what do people living on low incomes in the state of Oregon need. And there is a lot of conversation about that's too much. We can't do that. The highest users of government welfare are the wealthy homeowners. We now have this data. Not that we didn't understand it, the data is right here. And this entitlement to the mortgage income deduction is really enshrined as something that is untouchable because of the mythology around it helps people keep their homes, it helps people live in their homes, it protects them from the vagaries of the economy, all of which might be true for the people who are enjoying it. And we've just seen that the people who are enjoying it are a particular segment of our communities. They don't live in rural areas. They're not largely people of color, and they don't, have income that allows them likely to heat and eat and sleep concurrently rather than consecutively. So I think we have to understand this data from that perspective on the other side of our house, which is what are we doing to keep renters in housing? What are we doing with the community services block grant dollars to help people who are living on a low income be able to simply live, and to use this data to increase our narratives about who's actually on government welfare and who is not, as we have these conversations about what is possible, what is appropriate to do for people living on a low income. I also want us to ask, we just had a lot of conversation about what our legislative packages were going to look like for the coming session. I think the recommendation that is here is one we should work into a legislative concept paper for the department. I know that we are not the place where this has to live. I know where, there are lots more experts on it. However, it's going to take a number of departments, I think, and a number of advocates out in the community, and we have a lot of fantastic advocates listening to this meeting right now, to start to get this to move. And it's been on the agenda for advocates forever and ever and ever. This is a moment. I think we have to walk into this moment, and we as the council have to start by using the tools at our disposal, which is a legislative concept package that says adopt these recommendations and work on them, workshop them, whatever. We need a legislative concept package that's related to this, that references this work and calls for the legislature to make some change. And I hope that as we move forward from this moment, that we're able to use this data as part of our narrative and our storytelling about why we're focusing on asset building, why we're focusing on financial investment, why we're focusing on trusting that people living on a low income know what they need and simply need to get the resources in many situations from us with this data as part of that narrative and storytelling. So Andrea, Director Bell, I don't know, what the process is for us to do that, but I'd love to put a pin with the legislative team to ask them to explore converting this recommendation into some kind of a legislative concept package. Thank you.
Chair Hall, if I may just
I was going to ask you if you wanted to weigh in.
Well, yeah, this is, first of all, to our partners at the Secretary of State, this is great. I appreciate this and appreciate all of the comments and questions. I have more of a broader comment that I want to make, and maybe it's also just a collective reminder for us as a state agency in terms of the topic that we talk about a lot, which is race and the intersectionality. We talk about race and equity and racial justice in rural communities, equity and racial justice and asset building, equity and racial justice and what I want to just elevate, and these are things that we know, but on that front, because we talk a lot about statutes and policies and programs and implementations here, it is a reminder that whether a statute, a policy, or a program explicitly or unexplicitly has an element of racial justice, even if there's nothing seemingly racially justice related, there is always an intersection of racial justice. And so I'm just elevating that for collective consciousness, and our responsibility as a state agency, as a government agency, is if we do not consciously seek to write in or include strategies that acknowledge that, we run the risk of perpetuating injustice. And so this is not about this particular topic, this is just more globally, because we talk a lot about policy frameworks and investments and a lot of things that are very technical in nature, but I want to just elevate that because I know that's something that we talk a lot about. So I just wanted to elevate that for both our partners and members of the public that may be listening in today, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is government relations, and Nicole Sting is going to walk us through this portion of the agenda. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Hall, members of the Housing Stability Council, Executive Director Bell. It's good to be with you this morning. For the record, my name is Nicole Sting. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Government Relations here at OHCS. We have 3 topics to bring before you today. The first is a consent motion related to the Local Innovation Fast Track Program. We'll also discuss somewhat of a walk-on item, the supplemental document you received related to the rulemaking for the Market Offset Fund. And additionally, we'll talk about rulemaking authority and council engagement. I have joined today by Ms. Ladwig, who will walk through these items. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to her to walk through our 2 motions and our discussion topic.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Hall, council members, Executive Director Bell, and all in virtual attendance for this opportunity. I am JC Ladwig, and I'm the Administrative Rules and Legislative Coordinator in the Government Relations team here at OHCS. As Assistant Director Sting mentioned, I do have 3 topics to review with you this morning, and 2 of them were detailed in the packet. But I want to first start with that consent update to the Local Innovation Fast Track Administrative Rules. So in Oregon's revised statutes 458, 548, subsection 8, that's a lot, it's in the memo. It states that the department, with the advice and consent of the council, shall adopt rules to implement the provisions of the LIFT program. So last December, when council approved the framework and criteria for the Local Innovation and Fast Track Program, and now I'm here today to request a motion to consent to update the administrative rules within the division of 813, 135, Department 10, 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, and 60. Along with the approved framework, we will be doing updates to their program manual as well. These rules updates include the new addition to that program manual, and that creates a lot of transparency for our partners. Pending any questions to this request, I would like to request a consent to update the LIFT rules and ask council to approve the recommendation on page 39.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Anybody?
Second.
Okay, and could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFontorum,
Yes.
Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mena,
Yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right. And we've got more under this item.
Yes, Chair Harl, thank you. So I will move us into the market cost offset fund rule change. So this is a bit of a walk-on item, and I know Interim Director for the Affordable Rental Housing Department, Natasha Detwala-Adabi, included a supplemental document in today's meeting related to this rulemaking request. But in ORS, the Oregon Revised Statutes 546, 555, subsection 10, the council shall establish by rule one or more threshold amounts by which a housing grant or other housing fund award proposal requires the review and approval. And I'm happy to introduce the director, our interim director of affordable rental housing, Natasha Detweiler, to further explain the market cost offset fund thresholds and the need to update these rules.
Thank you very much, JC. I appreciate the being put into this slot here as we were already discussing rule updates. At the last meeting, we approved the market cost offset and that idea that we would have those approvals go through our finance committee review process. As we went back and consulted with Department of Justice, they felt like we needed to include a rule update to instead establish essentially parameters for what we required Housing Stability Council specifically to review. And so in this proposed rule update, it essentially is allowing us the authority that you approved us to do last month and established that the threshold for so we have added a programmatic component around these market-driven programs. So things like our land acquisition program, where it's really critical that we are able to be nimble and reflexive to market opportunities, as well as this market cost offset, where we are needing to provide some assurance to projects as they are working to secure their final lender and investor commitments. And I will also acknowledge that the vast majority of these will also come back to council as their final bond approvals. So you will actually see them, but we are be able to give confidence to the development teams as they are kind of working to get to that closing table to secure final investments. And so the structure that we have recommended is that we would kind of retain that the finance committee review process, where we're again walking through all of the rigor to make sure that projects have done all of the value engineering that they can, identify other resources, and we apply kind of urban, rural, and equity and racial justice funds to try to identify where we can most effectively use that market cost offset intervention. And then the ones that we would specifically need to have council approve in advance of that bond approval would be where the increase is greater than 25% of where that's the inflationary costs have been more than 25%. And so in this environment, that felt really appropriate because that is essentially like the highest percentage would come to council. The ones that are kind of the majority in that kind of the middle of the curve there, we would be essentially doing an internal approval process and then bringing at the time of final bond approval. We then also put in there specifics around the land acquisition program, and identified that we would need to bring for council deliberate approval properties where the purchase price was above $5 million. These rules we anticipate putting in kind of on a temporary basis, on an emergency temporary basis, with the idea that as we go through the rest of this year, we'll embark on a deliberate permanent rulemaking process that includes a lot of updated consideration and thought from our Department of Justice partners, as well as outreach and setting up rules advisory committee to get real formal input, but that this was the step we need to be able to continue the direction we were set out at the last month's meeting. And happy for any questions.
Any questions from the council? Javier.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I think my question is a little more broad than this specific request, and it really has to deal with, and I don't know where this interjects, but between the rulemaking, between the underwriting process, and it gets to the Housing Stability Council, it's approved, and then moves forward to implementation or funding. If there is any type of legal concern or policy concern that it does not move forward, how does that come back to the council? And the reason I bring that up is because I read, it was in the Wyoming Week in terms of a project that was approved by council that did not move forward because bond council just reviewed the project and said they did not meet the standards. And so where does that come, and how we inform of those decisions where we think that there's a project that's being funded? And I'm not disagreeing with the decision. I just need to, as a counselor, better understand how has those decisions been made. And so that's more of my question, more on the general basis.
Yeah, I think the project that you're referencing is probably the one that was covered by the Willamette Week, the Pepsi Splash project. This is a project that we had funded, had Housing Stability Council approve, and then as we were working to finalize legal documentation, had barriers to getting legal sufficiency of review by our Department of Justice. And this was attributed to what they identified as statutory limitations for OHCS. And that statutory limit is that OHCS in statute has, there's lots of things. Among them, there is a line that indicates that we can only invest in projects where no more than 30% of the units are serving households above 120% area median income. And to, in most cases, and so this was really a statute, it created to embolden us to do mixed income investments. The majority, all of our mixed income investments to that point had been projects where, 80% were affordable and the little 20% were market. This was really flipped upside down in that Pepsi transaction. And we continued to work with Department of Justice and the sponsor to find a path through, and were not able to find a path through to achieve legal sufficiency. And I think the point of when does that come back to council is incredibly important, because we did not bring it back to council. And we should probably think about, as we figure out what the right tenor for these feedback loops when we have these issues. I guess in hindsight, feel like we should have brought it back to council to acknowledge and report back. But we, again, at the time when we were seeking and pursuing council approval, we did not feel like there was going to be a legal barrier, thinking that some of the traditional structures around condoing resources that would be sufficient, and it did not end up being sufficient. And to that statute, we are also putting forward a legislative concept for 2023 that I think we've been doing some briefing with council about, which would make a revision to that statute to no longer have that barrier.
Councilmember Mena, I just want to be sure that answers your question, because I think there was a process question, and I think from this, we will also need to know and engage with council around what you need as we sort of, as we have these monthly meetings, we're bringing big, heavy content. It will be helpful for us to know specifically what you individually and as a council need as these sort of really tricky and kind of dynamic things come up. But I want to be sure that answers your question before we move on specifically.
Thank you, Director. I guess my question was, that was an example. It's more about how is that those decisions, those evaluations, so I understand that may be wrong, but in approving this request allows the department to create rulemaking and establish rulemaking for this project. And so we're deferring that to the department. When and how there are conflicts based on whether it's legal conflicts or policy conflicts, are those coming back to the council for review? And so that's my question.
And I don't know that I have a terrific answer right now, Javier. Councilmember Mena. I'm also realizing, as I think about that, you approve projects that are funded through NOFAs, you approve projects as we are, in the bond transactions as we're literally approaching the closing table. And there are absolutely times when NOFA funded projects end up not being able to proceed, either for, market shifts that make their project no longer viable, or something, what happens with the property, whatever. There's a kind of a large list, and we don't actually bring back that update to say what, and I think this is really, in my perspective, kind of bringing a need for us to do more robust pipeline reporting to say what are we have kind of in an underwriting situation, and where are we, where are projects rolling off by, a legal barrier, which would be, the statutory of barriers that we had with the Pepsi Splash deal, and any other number of reasons. And I think those, happen as a natural course of doing business, but it's not an actual feedback loop that we have deliberately presented back to Housing Stability Council. So I think I think that is incredibly relevant to the perspective we need you to hold. So I really would be happy and interested to work on a reporting that gives you more of that touch point to say when it is, and and as we think about how to ensure that you have the information that you need, finding opportunity and more time in the agenda to speak to what we identify as kind of legal barriers or issues that are making us have to make some unanticipated decisions.
Yeah, and last thing I would say is that thank you, really appreciate that. And I think that what I referenced to is the conversation that we had with the rent increase policy, and where we actually met with the legal counsel, and they told us, based on our analysis, this is what we think the council can or can't do. That was very, very helpful and allowed for us to, okay, based on the legalities and put the policy together, make a decision. So thank you.
Yeah, and using that type of opportunity, like in an executive session, to connect with our legal counsel is something that we can certainly be able to do more of as these issues arise. So I appreciate that.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I think the idea of a pipeline report twice a year, once a year would be really, really helpful. And then, as things kind of get higher visibility on the fly, hey, heads up, this is happening, and an opportunity to chat that through would be great. I want to admit I'm a little confused about what you're asking us to do right now. So, and if I'm the only one, I'll apologize and make this brief. You're asking us to make a decision that allows the department to continue to move forward in creating and developing a proposed rulemaking practice for that guides the council's engagement, correct? Or are you asking us to do something else? If you're asking us to give you the permission, quote unquote, and the space to do more work so you can come back to us with something more concrete for us to weigh in on and say yes or no to, that makes sense to me. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure what we're being asked to do. And I went back through and tried to look through the packet. I did look at it first, and I'm looking at it again, and I'm just confused. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Nicole.
Councilmember Lee, if I could kind of help clarify the confusion, because we are merging a few different items into one update here. So the first piece you spoke to is the third part of our presentation today that we'll get to after this recommendation. Interim Director Dotweiler Davy did introduce a supplementary document that outlined a motion to approve draft emergency or temporary rulemaking orders. So that's what's before you at this moment. And once there's a vote on that motion, we'll switch to the other part of the conversation.
Okay, Councilmember Sandoval.
Yeah, I'm wondering if in the past we've discussed potentially creating some subcommittees for the council. So I'm wondering if we could explore creating like a housing finance subcommittee. So this could be one that has the council members that have a strong, or their area of expertise is, housing finance, and they could have more substantive communications with the staff, and then that would create more like I guess stronger feedback loops, right? Because we deal with so many complicated issues, so that's what I would suggest.
So Chair Hall, if I may very quickly interject, and I thought maybe Councilmember Lee had a follow-up question, and pull me back, Councilmember Lee, if I'm off there. So you were right, Councilmember Sandoval. I think one of, as it's becoming clearer that the diversity of the work that the department is doing is growing and evolving. And I think particularly, but not exclusively on the affordable rental housing side, the work is becoming particularly complex, particularly as we're in this resource constrained environment. We're seeing cost increases, needing to think about different ways for the council structure to be able to support that work. And I think, although Councilmember Mena did not expressly say this, but I do think that there is a want and a desire for some deeper level of engagement and conversation on some of these specific items. So I would just say that that is something that we want to absolutely engage the council in a very substantive and specific way here in the near future around optimizing the structure to be able to have the right level of conversation so that council members can get the substance that they need and be able to get to the level of detail.
Okay, any further questions on this segment? If not, we'll let you continue on to the next part of this presentation.
Well, I think I have a motion. So and I apologize that this was not from the council packet. I'm just going to screen share so we can. I just put the link into chat. Where's the link into the chat as well. And so in this case, we have an administrative rule, 813-005-0008, where in rule we are identifying essentially thresholds for where council deliberately needs to approve loans, grants, resources, what have you. And these are, I don't remember the exact last time we updated this comprehensive rule, except that we did so in deliberate conversations with Housing Stability Council. And so we have, within this rule, there's information around the single family programs, around what needs to be approved. And that's where you'll see those mortgages coming for council approval. We then also have point 3 here, which has our regular programmatic thresholds. And this was, so where we are doing investments greater than $1 million, or where that investment constitutes more than half of the resources, or are outside of our policy parameters. Those are all places. So those are ongoing. What we're proposing here is that we're adding, in order to be able to, because what we had council approve was that we were able to do market cost offset investments without having to bring them to Housing Stability Council for approval. You were delegating that work through Finance Committee. The Department of Justice identified that that delegation doesn't quite work right, but that we could establish rules that essentially allow us to implement that delegated authority to Finance Committee for transactions where we're saying the increases are no more than 25%, and where the purchase of the property through land acquisition is less than 5 million. And it's really in this idea that we have some places where we have market-driven programs where that timeliness and response nature gives us a different need for intervention and timeliness of response. And so in the absence of setting up weekly council meetings to have that approval, we're trying to say, let's just come up with thresholds where we would need to seek approval within here. And so so this is what we want to implement on this emergency basis. But that, and I think Councilmember Lee, I also said, we are also planning, so we want to do this on an emergency basis right now so that we can move forward, but we are committing to do permanent rule make updates that would have more robust engagement and dialogue with Housing Stability Council over the coming months, but wanting to make sure that we have the ability, or securing legal authority, that we're working within the statutory authority to do our market cost investments.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. What's the impact if we don't take any action on this right now?
We'll have to bring to you all of the market cost investments, and I think that we would likely need to have additional council meetings to make sure that we can meet the project timelines for assurance for lender investor.
So for instance, in like the next 90 days, while you all wanted to put together the permanent rulemaking and process, how many projects do you think would need to come directly to us in the next 90 days for lack of what I think I heard you say was we need space and time that this emergency decision will give us to really put the permanent decision in place. And I'm asking, what's the impact of not taking the emergency decision, going directly into the permanency process, and how, what's the impact, the unintended consequence of doing that?
I think the consequence is that we won't be able to deploy our market cost offset interventions in a way that we can be giving sponsor confidence as we work through internal processes. And I think that the bigger conversation around our updated rules is really the current thresholds that we have in place for the existing kind of ongoing business. The permanent rulemaking process can take up to 6 months. And so that doesn't let us do this market-driven component, and it doesn't let us do the analysis, and that really will bring us all along in terms of where we want to move and evolve these rules as they stand. So I think that really this rule update is essentially allowing us to do the work that you approved us to do last month.
All right, is somebody willing to make the proposed motion? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Mania.
Sorry, just one question in regard to the proposed language. $5 million on the land acquisition. Can you share a little more why that amount? Just in reference.
It was a point to call. Most property acquisitions are lesser than that, and through the land acquisition program, which is to buy bare land. It's not you're not buying a building in that program, and the real kind of market driver around that resource is to make sure that we can be a potential purchaser can come to OHCS and say, I need to really timely make this offer and this commitment. And so it's a place where we kind of inherently need to have some ability to be quick and responsive. And I like to think that we're always quick and responsive, but our processes normally take 60 to 90 days. And this is something where within a month, we would be able to provide the needed resources for that organization to do that acquisition. And so 5 million felt like a place where we would be investing a largely significant portion of the resources that are available and intended to go to serve the community, in a place where in our, in the forming of the rules for other transactions, the perspective that council really directed us toward was around really wanting to highlight and make sure that council was engaged in the areas of the biggest risk. And so I think it felt like the place where we are aiming to invest a large percentage of our resources that we have for the program felt like that risk level was appropriate.
Thank you, and that makes sense. But one last question real quick. I didn't get to see that, but is there a time limit in this temporary request? Is there an expire any time, or?
That's a great, I'm gonna look to JC in terms of emergency rules. So it's attributed to the market cost offset intervention. And so council has authorized it. As we kind of work through those resources and don't have them available, the program, that effort doesn't continue to exist. But in terms of the emergency rulemaking, she's let me know that they are effective for 180 days.
Thank you.
All right, is someone on the council comfortable with making the proposed resolution, or moving that the proposed resolution be adopted?
Moved.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFontorum.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
And Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thanks, everybody. And we're going to move on to the presentation from the Housing Stability Division. I'm going to change up the agenda just a little bit. We're going to take our mid-meeting break after this presentation. So just in case.
Chair Hall,
anyone-
my
Yeah.
apologies to interrupt. I feel like I'm doing a lot of that this morning. My apologies. I think we may have one more item under the rules if I'm looking at the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Sting, is that correct?
Executive Director Bell, that is correct. We wanted to talk with the council briefly about the council's role in rulemaking. And as we heard from two motions this morning, it's fairly inconsistent in programs, and want to be in dialogue with you about what that approach and council's role in rulemaking should look like moving forward. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Ms. Ladewig to walk through what she's found.
Thank you, Assistant Director Sting. And we're looking just to have a clearer understanding, as she mentioned, of the role for Housing Stability Council and what you all would like to have in our agency's rulemaking process. I mean, given the policies that we did review already, I can definitely understand that there is some confusion about which role and the preference for this council. With the goal and that goal in mind, I've outlined a few questions that were included in council's packets, but given that we're past time, I will defer to you, Chair Hall and Executive Director Bell, if we have time to talk to these questions, and if not, I'm happy to connect offline with council members that are interested in engaging. And I did note, of course, that Councilmember Sandoval, you did express some interest last a couple weeks ago at our retreat, so I did have that noted, but kind of wanted to defer to you, Chair Hall and Executive Director Bell.
Well, this is an important conversation, but we are running about 15 minutes behind on our scheduled times today. So I don't know, Director, and I know there might be a couple of people who have a hard stop and will have to leave at our scheduled adjournment time. So Director Bell, I'll ask you, what your thoughts are here? Or if anybody on the council has strong feelings one way or the other?
Chair Hall, I might add, if council members are particularly interested in engaging, myself and Ms. Ladowig would be happy to connect one-on-one offline to have these conversations. As was information provided to the council, OHCS is working on a general statute change cleanup bill, and we'd like to include consistent rulemaking interaction with the council as part of that bill. As Ms. Ladowig mentioned, Councilmember Sandoval has indicated he's interested in having that conversation with us, and we'd love to chat with anyone who'd like to engage.
Chair Hall, I might submit that given the questions that and engagement that we just had on rules and clarity, and knowing that not everybody has Ms. Ledwig's expertise on rules or lives and breathes rules all day, I would just offer that this might be good for the council to take back, to think on, and then for us to have some follow-up conversation so that we can figure out if we need to do some level setting and education on this before we get into seeking to engage the council on their role and what their needs are. So I would leave it to the council to see if that feels aligned with each of you.
Does that make sense to everyone? I'm seeing some heads nod. Okay, well, thank you very much, Nicole and team. Now we'll move to the Housing Stabilization Division, our update on the Navigation Center investment for people experiencing homelessness. And before I turn it over to the team, just a couple of things that I think are useful, valuable in setting the context for this discussion. That in recent years, the Oregon Housing and Community Services budget has grown phenomenally, has awareness at the legislative and executive level has grown of the totality of the challenges involved in bringing everyone an opportunity for safe, stable, affordable housing. The investments in homelessness and homeless services has particularly grown, a 5-time increase in just a few years. And I think it's important, and we've got a number of guests on this conversation today, to realize the commitment I see in the agency to doing this in a way, not a one-size-fits-all way, but really partnering with each community and addressing each community's needs. So with that, Jill Smith, you want to introduce the topic further and the team?
Yes, thank you so much for that introduction, Chair Hall. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and council members. I'm Jill Smith. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Interim Director of Housing Stabilization. I have the opportunity to be here this morning with Mike Savara, the Chief Programs Officer for Housing Stabilization, and Judy Yui Paschini, our Homeless Policy Strategist, to work with them on presentation for you on navigation centers. And just a very brief introduction. As you know, navigation centers are a new intervention in Oregon that's being tested, that we're all investing in, and we'll have to measure and understand their effectiveness. Our hope is to create low barrier shelter sites with the services necessary for folks to make trusted connections in one place, a place that they can not only access services and supports, but a place that they can access permanent housing. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Chief Programs Officer Savara.
Thank you so much, Director Smith, and good morning, Executive Director Bell, Chair Hall, members of the council. It's so great to be with you, and I'm so happy we were able to rearrange the schedule a little bit to be able to bring our amazing presenters in, providers from community action agency networks, from providers who are providing culturally specific services and behavioral health resources. Just so thankful for your time and want to make sure that we keep our comments short so we can make sure that the our providers are able to get their presentation in and really help contextualize what these navigation centers really mean for each community. So before I hand it over to Ms. Huey Pasquini, I want to just provide a little bit more context on top of what Director Smith was mentioning. We know that housing and services is what ends homelessness. Having said that, investing in immediate navigation centers, shelters, emergency services, street outreach is a part of how we build this larger system to make sure that while we're building housing, while we're making sure that those services are available in each community across the state, we have humanitarian responses to people who are in need of shelter and services immediately. We envision these navigation centers as being a really great step towards providing housing focus, meaning the purpose of the services provided is to help people secure permanent housing. So everyone in the service centers are actually driving towards trying to get folks access to housing. I was talking with our providers earlier this week from Mid-Columbia Community Action Agency about just how many folks they've been able to connect to permanent housing resources from shelters. And that's the kind of investment that we're hoping to see, that folks can get that stabilization and quickly move into those permanent housing options. We also believe that these should be service rich. Service rich to us really looks at the array of different services, from culturally specific services to behavioral health services to healthcare services, really making sure that any different types of needs folks may have, from making sure they can get connected to human services resources like food benefits or TANF or other types of resources, those are all available in one place. So folks don't have to go shopping around and trying to find different services. They're all available in one centralized place for folks to access. And additionally, making sure that these sites are culturally responsive, that they embed the values and beliefs that people who have specific needs around making sure that their unique life circumstances, their unique identities are valued and respected, making sure that we're designing these services that are accessible for everyone. So with that, I want to kind of hand it over to Ms. Huey Pasquini for a little bit more about our framework, and then we'll hand it over to our providers right after that.
Thank you, Chief Programs Officer Savara. Good morning, Executive Director Bell, Chair Hall, and council members. For the record, my name is Judy Huey Pasquini, Homeless Services Policy Strategist, and I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I'm going to focus my portion of the briefing on the application and funding formula process that ultimately drove our decision on the funding design. As you know, the navigation centers we are supporting was previously funded by the state in the 19 to 21 biennium, which required navigation centers to offer low barrier emergency shelter that is open 7 days per week and connects individuals and families with health services, permanent housing, and public benefits. Due to the impact of the pandemic and increases to construction costs and supply chain issues, most of the navigation centers have delayed their opening dates and require additional funding to complete construction and/or finance operational costs. In line with the original funding of the project, we required applicants to have been previously awarded a grant for navigation funding from the state, and that centers will provide low barrier shelters with an array of support services. We also felt it was important that providers approach the services work with the best practices in mind, such as leading with housing first principles, trauma-informed care, and wraparound services. We also want to highlight the importance of offering culturally specific services, behavioral health, and drop-in day centers. We requested that any navigation centers offering that behavioral health and culturally specific service to enter into MOUs with partnering organizations or agencies. Our homeless services section is using these additional components to increase the funding amounts the navigation center may receive beyond the $1 million base amount. In regard to our funding decision, our homeless services section has set aside a total of $12 million towards funding the navigation centers. Our base amount for the funding formula is set at $1 million for each of the 8 centers. And we recognize that no matter where they're located in the state, construction and operational costs could look the same. From our engagement with grantees from this program and others, we've heard feedback that the cost of construction may even be higher in rural areas because of the difficulty in obtaining supplies and bringing workers into less populated regions of the state. Out of the $12 million and with the base amount of $8 million, we've set aside $3 million to fund the services as previously mentioned, which include behavioral health, culturally specific services, and drop-in day use. The drop-in day use may include access to showers, services, toilets, and laundry facilities. Another $1 million will be entered into a funding formula based on the point-in-time count, homeless counts for the area that the Navigation Center serves. Currently, we are in our application review period. From the initial review, we have 7 out of the 8 centers that are in the process of or have entered into MOUs to provide health and or behavioral health services on site. 6 of the 8 are in the process or have entered into MOUs to provide culturally specific services at their navigation centers. And 3 of the 8 will offer drop-in day services open to the public. We expect for the application reviews to be completed in the next few weeks and that funding will be available no later than July 1st, 2022. Are there any questions from the council or Executive Director Bell?
I'm sorry for that sticky mute button, so just wanted to make sure there were no questions at this point. Okay, then feel free to move forward.
Okay, thank you for the council and Executive Director Bell for your time. I'd like to introduce one of our Navigation Center applicants to present their project, Kenny LaPointe. He's the Executive Director of the Mid-Columbia Community Action Council.
Thanks, Judy, and good morning, Director Bell, Chair Hall, and members of the council. Great to see all of you and OHCS team. It's great to see all of you in the virtual room. Before I get into my presentation, I just want to recognize my partners that are here today, which you'll get to hear from in a moment. That includes Martine Campos Davis from the Oregon Human Development Corporation, Max Janisic from One Community Health, which is our federally qualified health center, Al Barton, who is from the Mid-Columbia Center for Living, which is our behavioral health provider in our 3-county service territory, and then Deborah Whitefoot from Inchiwana Housing. I think Deborah's having a little bit of difficulty getting connected here, so I'm hoping that she can get on when we move on to her slide. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I do believe that you're going to be getting a copy of this presentation at some point in time here in the next few days. So as you all know, Mid-Columbia Community Action is the community action agency for Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman counties. I'm not going to go through all of our purpose, mission, vision, values. I did want to provide that for you so you had a chance to take a look at that when you get a copy of the presentation, but I want to make sure that we're able to get to the meat of the presentation on navigation centers here. So starting out with the point in time count numbers from 2022, the reason I'm doing that is to really highlight the need for this project. In Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman counties, we did the point in time count. We led the point in time count. We had great collaboration amongst multiple community partners in January when that count was done. It was probably the most robust count the region has done in a long time, if ever. And that was really due to the partnerships that we're working on the ground to ensure that folks across our community were being counted, provided with resources. Many of those partners are here today with me. You'll notice that we had a pretty significant increase in the number of people experiencing houselessness. This is obviously not, huge numbers compared to large metro areas, but our region only has a population of somewhere around 52,000 people. We had 269 individuals experiencing houselessness, an increase of 90 from the prior count in 2020. You'll notice in these numbers that the largest increases were among those with mental illness, substance use disorders, Native community members, and the Latinx community. That is a big reason why we have the partnerships here today that are going to be working together out of our navigation center. And I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I wanted to make sure that we were grounded here in a little bit of data for the reason why this project makes sense. So as has been described already, a navigation center is a shelter that also provides services, either referrals to services or services on the site. We are the operator of an 18-unit transitional and emergency shelter in the Dalles that serves up to 36 individuals experiencing houselessness. This site is in public right-of-way right now. It is not a permanent site. The city of the Dalles has granted us a use agreement on it. It was never meant to be permanent. What you don't see here is we also have a shower trailer that is operating on the backside to provide sanitation services. We're also making great use of the limited space we have here. You also don't see that our office is in an RV. So we're running a 24/7 shelter out of an RV. But we are able to come on site and coordinate services with partner agencies. In fact, every Tuesday, Mid-Columbia Center for Living and One Community Health are doing wraparound service provision on the site. Max from One Community Health will talk more in a moment about La Clinica, but they're able to come out on the site and provide mobile physical health services. So these services have really had a huge impact on the folks experiencing houselessness being served at the shelter. I will also note that in 2021, from a success standpoint, we served 80 individuals at our shelter over the entire year. This is a 24/7, 365-day shelter. We served 80 individuals. We were able to place 21 of them into permanent housing during the time that they were served there. Since the beginning of this year, we have actually been able to transition over 30 individuals from shelter into permanent housing, and we are wrapping housing services, physical health, behavioral health, all of those types of services around them in this sort of makeshift location right now. And having this navigation center, again, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, will add just more infrastructure and our ability to serve people across our community. So the Dalles Navigation Center, as I mentioned, is going to combine our 36-bed non-congregate shelter. I'm also going to note, I think you all know this, non-congregate sheltering was established at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic as a solution to congregate sheltering, which created more risk for exposure to COVID-19. We feel like that was very successful, being that in 2021, we did not have a single shelter client who tested positive for COVID-19. Part of that, I'm going to say, I believe, is luck, but part of it is also the operational nature of the project. We also were able to provide, through our partner organizations, opportunities for testing clinics as well as vaccination clinics at our site. So the Navigation Center is really going to pull these services that we're kind of makeshifting together on a week-to-week basis. It'll provide office space to do those out of, better confidential client meeting space. Right now, our service providers and our own housing staff are meeting with clients standing in the dirt on a dirt lot in the Dalles, and that is not very conducive to client confidentiality. It's not conducive to health. It's super windy in the Dalles. It got super snowy this year. It's raining today, so standing outside and trying to provide services in this type of environment is just really difficult. So the Navigation Center is just going to bring some better infrastructure around that. It's also going to pull our culturally specific partners. Again, they've been key in creating more access to services across our community, being the Oregon Human Development Corporation and Inchiwana Housing. They're both going to be co-locating with us in the Navigation Center. In fact, OHDC is going to be moving their entire Dalles office to the Navigation Center, and Inchiwana Housing will be moving their entire Mid-Columbia Gorge service center to the Navigation Center. We will also have behavioral health and physical health services on site. I'll let my partners talk more about what those services will be and why there is a need for them. But again, we're doing that right now, and these are key partnerships to creating better health for folks who are receiving services through us. And it also, makes sure to address more than just their housing needs. We know people need to be healthy in order for them to even think about, the next steps into housing. So far to date, we have received funding from the Oregon Legislature. We received two $1.5 million buckets of funds, one from the 21 session, the end of session bill, Christmas tree bill, and then another 1.5 from the short session. We've also received $500,000 from the City of the Dalles. The City of the Dalles has been very supportive of this project, and in fact, they created a land use development ordinance allowing for shelters to be sited within the urban growth boundary. And that is really in response to the need for a project of this nature. We also received $400,000 from Wasco County in ARPA funds for the project. So again, really broad community support for the project. Our agency will be moving all of its Dalles offices to the Navigation Center. So some of you are familiar with what our offices currently look like, and you know that this is needed if you've ever been to our space. We are in a 3-bedroom, very old house right now, and we have seen significant increases in staffing. We've gone from 9 staff to 27. So, a large increase in staffing, but we're still in a 3-bedroom house. So we are making things work, but we need better infrastructure in order to support both our staff and our community. These are the partner agencies that are included in the project. Many of them will co-locate, many of them will come on site on a regular basis and provide services. The next door, Mid-Columbia Housing Authority, the ones I've mentioned that are here today. The Columbia Gorge Health Council, which is the governing body of our CCO, is planning to move their offices entirely into the Navigation Center as well. We also have recently been working with DHS, who is going to be putting an eligibility specialist in the Navigation Center full-time to provide eligibility determinations for our clients for various DHS programs, including SNAP, TANF, VOC Rehab, Family Self-Sufficiency. So working closely with them to get somebody on the site. I'm not going to go into all this detail. I will just note that this is our core project team who is working on the project. We've done some programming sessions, charrettes with our project partners to really determine some core values of the project. A couple things, we want to make sure that we are utilizing businesses that are owned by veterans, women, Native, Latinx, and people of color. So that is a value set for our program partners, and we're making sure that is reflected in our contracting processes. We also want to try and hire local businesses as much as possible, although that can be difficult, as Judy kind of mentioned. Costs are high in rural areas because it's difficult to get contractors in the area. I will note that we selected Bremick Construction because they demonstrated the greatest past history with utilizing local subcontractors in the Mid-Columbia region. We also, Access Architecture specializes in trauma-informed design and equity-centered design. So that is another core value of the project that is being implemented through how we're building the space out itself. A couple other things from a needs standpoint, our program partners identified the need for more community meeting room space. We really have nothing in the Dalles where you can have a partner meeting, in person. We recognize that as a need. It will be a part of the center. Career resource and computer lab, classroom spaces, so we can, bring things like ready to rent. OHDC, which Martine will talk about more, does some career development, job training, programming, so classroom spaces will be beneficial there. We will also have a commercial kitchen, which will provide food service to our shelter guests, as well as provide some job training opportunities for folks who are, either staying in our shelter or receiving services from us. We will also have drop-in childcare space for families who are coming in with kiddos and need to receive services. So this is a huge need. It's a trauma-informed way of serving people. You come into the Navigation Center, you have your 5-year-old kiddo with you, and you need to have a pretty intense conversation with a caseworker. We don't want you to have to drag your 5-year-old through a difficult conversation. and then have to explain that further down the road. We'll be partnering with the community college to have drop-in childcare space for folks who are coming in to receive services. With that, I'm going to go ahead. If Deborah is on, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah to talk about Inchiwana housing, if she's able to talk. I don't know if she's on.
Yes, I'm on, Kenny.
Great, thanks, Deborah. I'm glad you could get on here. So I don't know if you can see the slide, but I've got your slide on your organization up. So feel free to talk about who you are, what you do, and why the Navigation Center is important to you and to the community that you're serving.
Thank you, Kenny. Nech Maitsky, Inknashwaniksha, Alishwalach, Preston Timke, Deborah Whitefoot. I am a member of the Yakima Nation. I'm also the Executive Director of Inchiwana Housing. We are an emerging 501c3 focusing on housing and community development for the Native American community living along the Columbia River. And I'm thankful for this opportunity today to be here to talk to you folks about affordable housing. I want to give you a little bit of background information about Inchiwana. We were formed because of a 2-year study, and actually they're longer than that, studies regarding the legislation and authorization for village replacement for homes inundated by the dams, Bonneville, the Dalles, and John Day. That authorization has been in effect for 70 years and has not come to fruition yet. More recently, it came to light to senators and congressmen from Washington and Oregon about the Columbia River housing crisis for the Native population living at the in-lieu and treaty fishing access sites. And so the study was done to say who is going to manage the housing if and when it is built. So a series of meetings were held and a name was decided, Inchiwana, by the people of the river. Inchiwana means the big river, the Columbia River. And I want to also slip in here, as we're talking about that, a little bit of a land acknowledgement to the land that we all sit on, that belonged to the indigenous people who lived here previous to colonial settlement. The 9 tribes of Oregon and the 14 tribes and bands of the Columbia River, which include the Nez Perce tribe from Idaho. The tribes were forcibly removed from their homeland, and I want to acknowledge the historical trauma that has resulted from that, and also want to establish and recognize a place of healing that we have come to, that I hope that we can come to, a place of healing for what has happened in the past, that we can acknowledge it, recognize it, and heal it. And so that's the place where I come from, and I'm really thankful to have this opportunity to work with Kenny and McCack. They have been our partners. We've been here in establishment since 2020, and I started working here, and right away the pandemic started, and so I started under stressful situations, but the COVID was the silver lining in the cloud that we were living, because I also had to start this program, and it also was the census year. I got a census grant from Oregon We Count, and so I needed to get out there, and so it was an opportunity to do COVID education and get the hard to count population of Native Americans living at the in-lieu sites and treaty fishing access sites. So that started, and we did that, and we have a partnership. This is where I met Kenny, the Gorge Native American Collaboration, which at that time was about 5 people, 5 partners. Now we're up to 30 plus partners of providers within the Gorge area, including county governments, county programs in Washington and Oregon, food banks in Washington and Oregon, state offices in Washington and Oregon, and just many more healthcare providers and education providers. So we have a well-rounded group of providers, and this last year, Kenny and the McCack provided some agreements to help people get out of the cold funds. So we were able to actually help elders that were living at the in-lieu sites and in really cold situations. These are native speakers. We wanted to protect them because they carry the language. So we were able to house them during the very terrible weather that we had this last winter and the snow. We were able to rescue some people out of that situation also, living at the in-lieu sites because of the snow. They were actually trapped. They didn't have propane to keep warm. So, you know, these resources are really invaluable on the ground and help save people's lives. That's the bottom line. It saves lives. And so very thankful to be a partner with Kenny and the Navigation Center that's going to be built to have culturally relevant services for our people. It's really important. I don't know when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will fulfill their obligation to the tribal people. There is more recent excitement about it, and because of Deb Haaland and the Department of Interior, and she is moving things forward for our people, especially those are the most vulnerable. And so she is aware of this problem, and they have actually started authorizing some funds, appropriating some funds to actually get like clean water, sewer, and sanitation at the sites, which is really in need of upgrades. The water is not drinkable, I don't think, you know, at some of the sites, and so that's very important. And, you know, I hope to do some development someday for our people. If the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does not come forward, then, you know, we still have a crisis. We still have a crisis. And so I'm just thankful to be here today and to talk to you and get to know you a little bit, and you get to know me. We are an emerging 501c3 currently being fiscally sponsored by NAYA, Native American Youth and Families out of Portland. They're our fiscal sponsor. And so we are moving forward and doing our due diligence to be a 501c3 on our own. So I appreciate your time today, and thank you for letting me be here and talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah, and we're glad to have you as a partner, certainly. And I will just note that Inchiwana Housing has been a partner with us in particular on, you know, the Navigation Center, as well as Out of the Cold funds and Emergency Solutions CV grants. So they've been partners with us there. And are conducting street outreach through the ESG grant program. So next I want to turn it over to Martine Campos Davis, who you all know. Martine?
Good morning, members of the council, Chair Hall, Director Bell. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to talk about this project and a little bit about OHTC. For those of you who don't know, Oregon Human Development Corporation. We've been operating in the state since 1979, delivering farm worker related services, both in housing services and in workforce development arena. The Columbia Gorge, excuse me, I'm getting over my a little bout of something here. The Columbia Gorge is home to a significant portion of the state's farm worker population. I think if you take both the migrant and seasonal numbers for both Hood River and the Dalles, ends up comprising about 25% of the overall statewide population for farm workers in the state. That's because there's such a huge influx of farm workers that come in for the various harvest seasons in the gorge. When Director LaPointe approached us about coming into and collaborating on this project, I got to say that this was a really true collaboration effort from the ground up. Us and the other organizations were involved in the planning process, talking to architects, really talking about needs and how even the layout will be spaced so that clients come in and face a welcoming environment. We'll be bringing our entire Dalles staff into the center there. All of our staff, our frontline staff across the state are 100% bilingual, bicultural. Most of our frontline staff are former farm workers themselves. And so we'll be bringing that to the table. We've also committed to helping fund a reception point that's also bicultural and responsive to the community needs. Because that's the first thing that people see when they come in is that front desk person, and we need that person to be reflective of the communities we want to be serving. So this population that we serve, farm workers, they'll be coming to this center to take advantage of the services that are being made available around housing, but also as part of our strategy, once we stabilize folks in housing, we know that the best way to kind of move them up in their housing stabilization is to increase their wages. And so we'll be marrying our services and workforce development and helping folks climb that ladder in workforce and find that better job by providing education and training opportunities through funding that comes from the state and through other federal resources. And I think that's about it. Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Martine. Glad you could be here. Next, I want to turn it over to Al Barton. Al Barton is the Interim Director of the Mid-Columbia Center for Living, which, as I mentioned before, is the behavioral health provider for Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman County. Al?
I'm here. Can you all hear me? Okay,
Yes,
great.
sir.
All right, greetings, Chair and Council and Director Kenny. Sincerely appreciate the opportunity to participate and talk briefly about what we do and how we're going to collaborate and participate here. So again, my name is Al Barton. I'm a licensed professional counselor and I use he, his, and him pronouns. I'm the interim director, as Kenny mentioned, for the community mental health program here. I'm also the chair of the Columbia Gorge Health Council, which is helps oversee our certified coordinated care organization. And then most importantly, I have some lived experience in behavioral health, both from personal and family. So I bring all those pieces to the table. Center for Living, as you can see, we're the community mental health program for the 3 similar counties that the Navigation Center serves for Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman. We're also a certified community behavioral health clinic. So we're trying to integrate some health screening services for a lot of the clients that we serve and make referrals to. You'll talk to one of our community partners here in a minute, but our primary care clinics. Community mental health programs are really charged with critical services for unrepresented folks. At the top of our service array is mobile crisis. We try to meet people in the community to divert them from jails and emergency room, which, when I started in this field, was the primary place that behavioral health crises happened. Nowadays, we try to meet people where they're at in the community to try to divert them from those places. Community mental health programs also serve primarily in the adult world, folks with severe and persistent mental illness. So these tend to be more challenging clients to engage. They tend to be more challenging clients with more chronic conditions that tend to continue over their lifespan. We tend to be one of the few providers that offers a lot of the specialized services like, assertive community treatment and jail diversion services. We employ about 100 staff right now. We should be at about 130, but most of our staff members are going to provide the services you see on the slide here. I'm really honored to work with a number of amazing certified recovery mentors and peer service providers. These are folks with lived experience who decide to become professionals and help folks. So we have a number of those folks, and those folks just, they work in the community, right? They have offices and desks, but they're really out in the world. We have a number of case managers, and then of course we do much more traditional behavioral health services like, substance abuse, addiction counseling, therapy, and psychiatry services. We have a few psychiatrists that work with us. So, and then some medical providers that help kind of do some preliminary stuff to try to connect folks to primary care. Let's see. So, again, we're really honored and excited to be part of this. One of the biggest challenges, if you surveyed our staff and say, if you had a magic wand, what are your clients' needs? They're going to talk about affordable, supportive, and viable housing. That's just going to be the top of the list, I would say, almost exclusively. If you look at our statistics and data, it's just under probably 1 out of 10 people are going to be listed as not having suitable housing right now. We would expect that, when you think about underhoused folks with mental health problems, that's even going to be higher. This opportunity will provide another nexus for us to engage people. One of the most difficult pieces about engaging a lot of the folks, unfortunately, tends to be like law enforcement or jails. This will give us a much more trauma-informed approach to engage people. Oftentimes the folks with severe mental illness, they don't knock on our door and say, "Hey, I'm having some difficulty. I want to, get started on my medicines and therapy." They, are seeking basic needs or basic supports. And I think the opportunity to co-locate and have staff on site at this place will be amazing. Also, the other, as you heard, the key community partners are going to be there. I think it's just going to provide that nexus point for people to get there. We have staff that are motivated and interested in being part of this. And so I really look forward to this being a big part of the continuum of care for behavioral health in our clinic. And again, I'm really honored to be part of it. And I appreciate, again, the council for entertaining our opportunities and for the leadership and drive of Kenny LaPointe for moving us forward. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Al. Appreciate you being here. And I'll just note, Al and Mid-Columbia Center for Living have been a strong partner of ours since we took over shelter operations in the Dalles, and his team is out on our shelter site every day, providing services to folks who are experiencing mental illness, who may have substance use disorders, that are staying at our shelter sites. Next, I want to turn it over to Max Janisic from One Community Health to talk about the work that they do and kind of the work that they're already doing with our current shelter site. So I'll kick it over to Max.
Thanks, Kenny, and thank you, council members and everyone in attendance. Can you guys hear me okay? Great.
Yep.
I'll really appreciate your support of the Navigation Center and hearing us today. As Kenny mentioned, One Community Health is a federally qualified health center that supports patients in the Columbia River Gorge. So if I assume most of you are familiar with a federally qualified health center, but if you're not, it'd be similar to like Northwest Human Services, Virginia Garcia, Mosaic. Some of those names may ring a bell if you haven't heard the acronym before. We support over 23,000 patients, and we have a special focus on traditionally underserved communities, and that includes in our area migrant seasonal farm workers, the Native American community, low-income patients, the houseless population, and others who have faced health equity challenges. As Kenny mentioned, we work in an area that can be challenging environmentally. So when he was talking about the wind and the rain, it reminded me of the early days of COVID when I was chasing down paperwork down the street as we're trying to do COVID tests in the amazing wind and rain we get out here. So having the right resources is really critical to supporting people. We're very supportive of the Navigation Center and Kenny's efforts on permanent supportive housing, have tremendous confidence in Kenny and his team based on the way they collaborate with the community, as you're seeing here today. I feel very blessed to have Kenny in the community. We've personally seen about an 82% increase in patients who identify as houseless in the last year. So the importance of this, it couldn't come at a more important time to improve the overall health of our community. Some of the services that we provide includes a mobile medical unit named La Clinica that Kenny has arranged for a dedicated parking spot and hookups for our team, and that is staffed by bilingual provider as well as community health workers. So we're very excited to have that spot available to support the community. We also have a dedicated vehicle called Waikanashpum, which means salmon people, and that is dedicated towards the Native American community. That can also come onto the site as well, and that's staffed by a Native American registered nurse and a CHW. CHW is a community health worker, for those of you who haven't heard that acronym, but I'm assuming most of you have. That team has done a great job of supporting the Native American community along on the Inlu sites, Salilo Village, and other spots along the river. We also will have access or be able to provide access to our substance abuse programs, which include recovery groups, an IMAT program that includes Sublocade. We also have bilingual behavioral health consultants that are available to help individuals who need care. So these are some of the services that people will be able to access, some directly at the site, some by coming to the clinic through building trusted relationships. And we're just very excited to be part of this and appreciate Kenny and the MCAC's team's leadership on this.
Thanks, Max, and thanks for being here and for your team's work today to serve folks experiencing houselessness. So as I wrap up here, I just wanted to give you a couple bits of information on the Navigation Center. So we were fortunate enough to have a community member, after hearing about the project at church, showed up at our front door and said, we want to give you 2.6 acres of land within city limits to build this project on. That land was deeded over to Mid-Columbia Community Action, and that's where we are developing the Navigation Center at. Here is there is a site rendering. Anybody who's gone through development knows this will change almost weekly, but this is kind of where we're at right now. We're only going to be utilizing about an acre and a half of the site, but as you can see with that sort of H-shaped building at the front, that's the main Navigation Center Service Center. It's approximately 14,000 square feet, commercial kitchen, childcare, computer resource center, job training, office space. Again, Mid-Columbia Community Action will be moving its entire offices, so we'll be providing household utility assistance, weatherization, veteran services, our housing programming, all out of this office. You've heard from our community partners who will be co-located there. We also have other community partners that will be co-located that aren't that did not join today. On the back side of the property, you see like a bunch of little boxes. That's where our shelter units will be going. And then we have another acre that is left over after we develop out the Navigation Center site. And we are hoping that we can bring permanent supportive housing to the backside of that property in the future. It would be a great site for PSH, having services all in one location. So last is just a photo of folks providing services out at our current shelter site. As you know, we've all talked about today, we've got La Clinica, that mobile medical unit at the top there providing services. Martine's team has come out and provided services to our shelter clients, and Al's team is on site on a daily basis. Deborah's team out doing outreach. So it's really a collaborative effort to serve the community. And, you know, I just, again, want to call attention to the fact that this is not just a service center for people experiencing homelessness. It's also a service center for folks who are low income, experiencing poverty. The Navigation Center will provide access to all those services in one location, creating a one-stop shop, easier access for people. So we're not sending them all over town to access services in a way that just makes no logistical sense. So we're happy to be the sponsor of this project, but all of these partners are what make this project a great project. This would not be a great project without them by our side. So I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have, and thanks for bearing with me.
Any questions? Thank you, Kenny. Councilmember Higginbotham.
Hi, thanks, Kenny. I really appreciate this presentation. I think this is just an awesome model of co-location, of partnerships, of things that we can look forward to in the future. And, you know, we talk about the power of partnerships and location and not sending people all over the place. And this is just an awesome model. I'm really happy that you presented this today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Councilmember Higginbotham. I will note that at the beginning of the development process, we began documenting every step that we took so that we could pass along this information to other regions of the state who were interested in duplicating this model. So our architects, the Housing Development Center as our development consultant, have all made sure that we are staying on track with keeping all the info on what we've been through, how we facilitated meetings, how we involve people with lived experience in the process, all of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I also want to join with Councilmember Higginbotham to thank you all, to appreciate this model and this work, and just say right on, right on. And I want to make some comments that come up out of this project. So these comments are not about this project. They're about the larger issues and systems that I think we need to keep our eyes on. First of all, this model of co-location with shelter services is not a new model. And I think we should not be referring to it as a new model because it somehow makes it exceptional within all of the shelter services that we fund across the state. And what we heard today, I think, are the best practices of co-location, cultural relevance and specificity, the integration of models, looking at people as whole persons within a shelter setting. And if this is exceptionalism, and I think it is an exceptional project, what are we funding at the rest of the shelters that we are funding across the state? There is nothing that is in this project that should not be in every other shelter program in this state, nor should it not be part of our expectations as the funders of those shelter programs. And I think we walk a very dangerous line when we think, oh, there's this shelter stuff over here, and then there are these exceptional programs that are doing exceptional things, and they should not be exceptional things. They should be typical, normal, and bottom line expectations for every shelter bed that we fund in this state. Now, I understand resources are an issue. However, Kenny, you just spoke to this, the approach, the attitude, the way in which people went into how they designed these services are as equally as important as the additional resources that might be necessary. And we have got to hold ourselves to a higher standard because we just heard an amazing presentation about what is possible. What just got articulated here is not impossible, and in fact, should be the norm. I'm very interested to hear from staff if we're working with 7 out of the 8 identified projects already. Who are those projects are being delivered by new providers that we don't normally work with and or culturally specific providers? And I think, again, Kenny, to your point, can they have the benefit of the work that this coalition and community have put together to implement within their own? There's so much best practice here. And I don't think, again, this idea of, well, great for Mid-Columbia, right? They did a fantastic thing. We don't know where the other communities are. This kind of mutual sharing of information, and there may be learning in the other communities that would be of benefit to Mid-Columbia. We need to have this understanding that they are both, that all the information is being shared as well as expectations being set, right? I also want to, and again, you don't need to answer this now, I want to understand how the relationships and the memorandums of understanding and resource sharing have been negotiated, because I hear that between the lines here, and that is also not a common practice where, you know, we ask our more mainstream organizations as partners of color to come in and be partners, but there's no compensation, there's no benefit, the resources aren't shared. And I think the ways in which you all have tried to go about that and be explicit about that needs to be baked into the expectation for the other 7 projects, and then further out to every other bed of shelter that we fund. And finally, I just want to say I appreciate the comments that were made about this, and I want to lift it up. This navigation is great when there's capacity to serve the people that you've navigated to the service, the service location. So many times we navigate instead of providing services, because once we navigate somebody there, there's no capacity at the treatment center. There's no capacity at the employment center. There's no capacity for the permanent supportive housing or any of those other kinds of resources that people actually need. And so I want us to be cautious about even calling these navigation centers, right? We're navigating whom to what? When there's a lack of resources that is housing and income and assets in a community, we're navigating people, we're pulling around the deck chairs. So I want us, again, this has nothing to do with this project, which I am thrilled about and over the moon, and I so appreciate all of you coming to share and present today. We, I think, need to take some lessons that you all have learned at the council and OHCS, spread them into the other 7 projects, and then start challenging our thinking about every other shelter bed we fund. Thank you.
Okay, one more call for questions or feedback from the council. All right, hearing none, I want to thank the team for this very informative presentation. And we are running a bit behind, but right now, let's go ahead and take our mid-meeting break. It is 11:08, and please be back, council members. We will resume promptly 23 minutes after the hour. Talk to you then. Welcome back, folks. I'm seeing 3 council members so far. Mary Lee, are you with us? It doesn't look like we've got a quorum back yet. Is that correct, Chayola?
They are still logged on. Cameras are off and mics are muted. So
okay.
Should be.
So in the interests of time and continuing with our very robust agenda, I'm going to reconvene the Housing Stability Council, 11:24 a.m. and we'll hear from the Affordable Rental Housing Division first, and we have 5 manufactured housing, pardon me, 5 manufactured housing transaction recommendations we're being asked to review. And just for a little context setting, affordable housing is operating under some new constraints in this COVID era. I think most people know, but just in case somebody isn't aware of how dramatic cost increases for construction costs are posing a real challenge for the agency and its local partners to get units on the ground in an affordable manner. But I think that's one of the things we'll be addressing. Natasha Detweiler-Dalby, the floor is yours, and take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and council members. I acknowledge that we are behind time schedule, so we will do our best to be as swift as possible, knowing that all of our materials are in our council packet. So I will share screen, and Ty Dunstan-Strain will do a brief overview of our transaction recommendations here today from the 4% tax credit program.
Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members, for the record, my name is Ty Dunstan-Strain, production manager, and well, just with the packet and referencing the memo, just wanted to had a couple of call out clarifications to what's published in the memo according to the agenda. There were 2 projects that are, upon further clarification, would just I'm gonna let folks know in advance that the classifications under our racial equity criteria for a couple of projects will be reclassified as working towards And I will call those out as we go through the packet. And just wanted to acknowledge that up front. And one other clarification on a project that they're in the memo, they're scheduled. We had those folks scheduled for finance committee, and I mean actually approved by finance committee, and they will be scheduled for finance committee, and I will call those out in these presentations just for context setting. So the first project is sponsored by Community Development Corporation. This is a lift award project that was awarded in talent called Renaissance Flats. It is part of our wildfire awardee projects. It includes 72 units, all new construction. There are robust engagement with partnerships with culturally specific organizations, specifically MOUs in place with natives of Wild Indigenous Alliance. The project meets three statewide housing plan: equity and racial justice, affordable housing, and rural communities, and meeting our MWSB targets. Next project, Shore Pines and Mills Creek, is a project in Florence, sponsored by Northwest Housing Alternatives. It is a lift project, and we in the memo excuse me, in the memo we classified it as meeting our equity and racial justice goals, but we have as part of our review or look as going to be classified as working towards equity and racial goals. And the clarification distinction is in matter to what the department is deemed as robust engagement with partnerships that are culturally specific organizations. The project is a 4% lift award. It has meeting our MWSP targets and serves two statewide housing priorities: affordable rental housing and in rural communities. That is slated to anticipated to close May of this month. Next slide. For this next project, 148th Apartments. It's also a lift project sponsored by Home First Development Corporation in Portland. It meets our equity and racial justice criteria. There's robust engagement with the Zomi Catholic community of Portland in serving refugees from Miramar, and there's robust marketing and outreach to various communities of color in the Portland area, and this is a lift project, 96 units. And next project is Maple Apartments, sponsored by Community Development Partners in partnership with Hacienda CDC. It is a 4% project and includes ag worker tax credits, and also includes Metro bond funding dollars, and is classified as furthering our equity racial justice goals and includes significant rental subsidy sponsored by Clackamas Housing Authority. Next slide. And Sunshine Apartments, this project as referenced by Chair Hall of our market cost offset fund, and it's a recipient of those dollars and needed a increased bond amount to get to construction close, and is sponsored by Wish Camper Development. Was a previous LIFT award, and includes 4%, and is with this additional funding, they'll reach the finish line and get units on the ground. And with that, I'd ask if I have any questions or discussions, and ask that you folks consider the motion.
All right, opening it up now for council questions or feedback. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, Ty and Natasha and all for the presentation. I appreciate it. Ty, I also appreciate you referencing that we still have some work to go on how we're articulating these projects and their relationship to our racial justice and equity goals. Towards that end, I have a couple of requests. One is that every time we have these presentations and to do this consenting, that we do a brief, what does it mean to work towards meet or further, so that we are all remembering. We've talked about what that is, and I think it's a great construct. However, I think every place we should have that before we start talking about the projects, so that people can understand what the assessment of the staff was for the project. The second thing is that I want to make sure that projects that are not doing much, if anything at all, other than simply expressing an aspiration to the MWESB requirements, don't land in the working towards. Someone has to actually be taking action, in my mind, to get into the working towards category. And if they're not doing anything, let's be honest and say it. And if it's simply, we've given our aspirations for MWESB, which we know for many legitimate reasons, people don't often meet. However, let's not have working towards be the catch-all for the folks who really haven't started their work yet. I would also like to ask that when you do the slide deck, that matches what's in the briefing paper that we get, because there's two different rubrics being used now, whether it meets the statewide housing plan or whether it's going through this new project assessment piece. And I just want to say, should we in this day and age and with these resources be funding any projects that are not intentionally centering racial justice and equity in their work in every way possible? What that looks like will be different in different communities, in a rural community, in a suburban community, an urban community. And I'm not sure we should be funding any work that doesn't explicitly center race and ethnicity. We've seen so much data that understands that there is a disparity that we have to look to addressing and writing in our work here. And Adam, minority, women, emerging, small businesses.
All right, Councilmember Sandoval.
Councilmember Sandoval, you're muted still.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I was just saying that I'm really amazed by the amount of projects that we're able to approve. So I've been on the council for 6 years now, and when I started, we would do maybe 2 projects. Two at the most, I think. And now, I mean, these are 5 projects, and just number of units that we're building throughout the state is, and that are, that our partners are building, it's just really, it's really amazing. So just good to see, and I want to thank the staff for the amazing work that you do, and the partners and the legislature too for being able to support all this.
Any other questions or feedback from council members at this point? If not, I think maybe we could move on to consideration of resolution number 2022-51. If somebody would like to make the motion.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFontorum. Councilmember DeFontorum. Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
And one last time, Councilmember DeFontorum. Looks like she may have dropped off. We still do have quorum. Thank you, council members.
All right. We'll move right along with affordable rental housing division then. I believe we've got the rent increase policy up next.
Absolutely. Thank you, council members. Before I hand it to Rick Ruzicka to talk about our recommendation for a motion today, I just did want to, I know you did get a letter, public testimony from Tom Cusack, and so I just wanted to kind of respond to the key points that he raised for your information. First, I'll take on his questions most connected to the consideration directly around rent increases, specifically about practices for over-income tenants and rent-assisted households. Tenants in affordable housing are required to be compliant with income limits when they first move in. As they continue to live in affordable housing, they are able to earn more. Ideally, that would be great if they could earn and increase their income, and they continue to provide that income information to property management. But if they are over income, they are not evicted and they are able to stay within the property. This can absolutely get more complicated where affordable units are in mixed income properties. As income increases, they're over 140% threshold, triggers a next available unit rule and to move around affordability restrictions. But I don't think we need to get that weedy on it in this forum. And I will also say that where there were also some kind of questions around rent assistance, where the tenant is receiving rent assistance, as the rent assistance itself is depending on the household income. So the amount of rent assistance provided as the tenant income increases, decreases. So it's really so the idea that that tenant is paying 30% of their household income for rent expenses. So they are able to get the benefit of rent assistance up until the point where they can cover the full amount of rent without being housing burdened, at which point they are no longer receiving the rent assistance. Functionally, the rationale for not evicting tenants as they become over income is to ensure tenant stability throughout, and so the idea that you're not disincentivized from earning more income. It is also part of a core connection that we want to make sure that affordable housing residents have in terms of programmatic investments to support transition to home ownership, like individual development accounts, as strategies towards encouraging those that are in affordable housing and are earning enough to move into the home ownership arena to be able to do so. Though we also have to acknowledge that fundamentally, given constraint in housing supply, at all income levels, we are likely to have over income tenants within our affordable portfolio. And so, which then is, how big of a problem, how much of our properties have over income tenants within them. We have been going through a lot of data migration, and so I'm looking at the most recent complete data that we were able to pull to report to HUD, and that showed that just around 17% of the households reported incomes at or above 60% area median income. So with the logic that tax credit housing limits serve up to 60%, up to 17% potentially could be over income. The degree to which they are over income, the data doesn't quite identify at this point. At the same time, nearly 60% of the households within our portfolio have incomes less than $20,000 a year. We have heard throughout our conversations from rent increase considerations, the voices of low and fixed income tenants for whom rent increases of any scale are at best problematic and to most very traumatic experiences. And so it's with that lens, along with the need for it to be a navigable process for our property owners and managers, that we are still wanting to move forward with the recommendations that we put forward today. Second, I will also, Tom does also raise a series of questions around our tenant data reporting, which I am really excited to be able to respond to when we have the data in hand. We are working to finalize our data transition to a new system. We are also actively collaborating within our compliance and asset management section and the research team to work on ways to more effectively track tenant outcomes than we've been able to do in the past. And so when we have that information in a stable place to report, as soon as we can do that, we plan to bring it back to council so that we can report on information both about tenant income and demographics generally. And so with that, I think I will hand it to Assistant Director of Planning and Policy, Rick Ruzicka, and I will share his presentation here.
Thank you, Director Detweiler Davey. Appreciate that. Chair Hall, council members, Executive Director Bell. Again, my name is Rick Ruzicka. I'm the Interim Assistant Director of Planning and Policy. And I'm here with James Hackett, the Assistant Director of Portfolio Administration. I'm going to be very brief because this is one of them topics we could talk about all day, but I provided you the policy that we are requesting be approved on page 75 of your packet. There's a memo on page 72 of your packet. Basically, the policy that you see is a modification of our current rent increase policy with some changes to put it in compliance with HB 3113 and to align with recommendations that we had worked with tenant advocacy groups on earlier this year. The new policy basically encourages partners to utilize regular and reasonable increases of 5% or less. They do not have to request approval for that. It's a notification only with a couple program exceptions because by federal law, we do have to approve those rent increases, and that's in the home and HTF program. We will, in this policy, continue to review and approve increases above 5% and up to the allowable 7% plus CPI, which is statutory cutoff under HB 3113. And we do feel that the policy is appropriate to kind of shift more in the direction of tenancy support, though I know earlier we tried to do something that was more balanced of an approach, but in seeing the extreme increases to the rental caps in 2022 through the HUD, the recent HUD income increases, we feel like some additional supports are necessary, and that's why we've kind of chosen this path. I'd like to, if Natasha, you go to the next slide, just kind of highlight kind of the main differences between the policy previously and the proposed policy. Mainly that, again, as I said, anything below 5%, we're not requiring approval. We're just would like notification upon notification to the resident. That is, again, different in the home and HDF programs. Anything over 5%, we will still approve. Anything above 7% plus CPI is not allowed. At turn, another major change, there are no limitations. So the landlord can increase to program max if they so choose at turnover, which is divergent from our current policy. So those are kind of the major changes from what we currently have in place to what we're proposing. We don't think they're too significant, and we are hopeful that the board will approve this. So Natasha, last slide. So after careful consideration, all the feedback we received, we are requesting that the Housing Stability Council approve the following motion, that we approve the presented changes to the rent increase policy effective June 1, 2022. And James and I are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Council questions, comments? Everybody gone quiet on this topic at once? Well,
I move the motion as stated.
thank you, Councilmember Lee. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Council. Councilmember DeFontorum. Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you, Council. Motion passes.
All right. We are rolling, and let's keep rolling. We are going to postpone wildfire direct awards to a future meeting. So we'll move on to resource allocation strategy. And who's presenting on that? Becky Isom?
Hi, yes, hold on just a second. I'm not prepared. I didn't know we were not going to do wildfire.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Because I need these approved, so that's a problem.
So may I maybe provide a little bit of clarification here? So Chair Hall, I think at the towards the end of the agenda, the disaster recovery team, if UC noted there was a briefing scheduled to get us back on track. That is the item that we will pause on for a separate conversation, but we will continue to go through the ARH.
My
items.
apologies.
No problem. We've got a hefty agenda today. There's a lot of detail here. And Chair Hall, I will just note, Director Flynn is on. So when we get to that wildfire item, although we're going to yield back on it for today for time, if there are council member questions on that item, because the memos are in there, we're happy to receive and answer any questions. Otherwise, we will save the wildfire topic that's noted later in the agenda for its own separate conversation.
All right, so we will move instead to wildfire direct awards. Again, sorry for my confusion.
Absolutely, and yes, and I thank you, Chair Hall, and I will hand it over to Becky Isom, the program manager.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get this to share and it's not wanting to share the correct screen. So please give me a moment.
If you want to email it to me, I can get it shared while you get started.
Okay. Hold on. I had this all in a way. It's literally like not sharing and I don't know why it's doing that.
Got it. No worries.
So I think I'm going to have to do this without it because I can't find anything. Everything's all this. So
No problem. So maybe no problem, Becky. We will get through this. If you want to go ahead and get started on the conversation as best as you can, and then Director Datweiler-Davy, if you have the content to pull up and are able to while
I'll share the memo on the screen as she talks to. Thank you. Go ahead, Becky.
Thank you.
Good morning, Housing Council Chair Hall and Executive Director Bell. For the record, I am Becky Isom, Senior Program Analyst in the Affordable Rental Housing State Resources Development section. I am here today to give a high-level review of the response that we have received for the wildfire direct funding offerings that were included in the 2022 NOFAs, as well as present 2 of the rental projects for funding consideration. All of the wildfire applications are required to meet specific threshold items in regards to incorporating disaster resiliency in both the placement and construction of the project. They have to prioritize households impacted by wildfire, and they also have to meet lift threshold items. The lift NOFAs were released on February 4th, 2022, and projects located inside any of the wildfire affected counties were eligible to apply. The counties were split into 3 groups, with Jackson County being in one group, Clackamas, Douglas, Klamath, and Lynn County in another group, and Lane, Lincoln, and Marion counties in the last group. Due to the overwhelming initial response to the rental offering, we amended the NOFA on April 11th in order to add more specificity to the intent of prioritizing projects that are ready to close. We currently have 6 complete wildfire rental applications turned in. And I actually have a really cool slide for you, but I don't get to show you that shows where they are. So I'll just try to explain really briefly where they're located. We have 3 that are located in the Rogue Valley. 2 of them are in the city of Medford proper, and 1 is actually in Talent. I've got 1 in the city of Estacada, 1 in the city of Lincoln City, and 1 in the city of Salem. The response for our home ownership funds has not been as robust. To date, we have received 2 applications. Both are in review right now. One of them is also in Salem, and then the other one is, you might have actually heard about it. It's a 3D printed one in the Medford area as well. They're in review, and you should be seeing those at next month's Housing Stability Council. To wrap up, I have 2 projects for funding consideration. Both of them are located in Jackson County and are expecting to start construction before the end of 2022. Orchard Meadows and Prescott Gardens is a scattered site project from the Housing Authority of Jackson County that's going to add 196 units in Medford. And Talent Senior Apartments is a small senior development from Age Plus that's going to be adding 22 units in Talent, Oregon. I am happy to discuss any questions that you might have on the materials discussed, and otherwise ask that you consider the motions that are on page 85 of your packet.
Questions or comments from the council? I'd entertain a motion then.
Move approval.
Oh, okay, and just to clarify, are these for both the projects that are in the listed in the agenda and have just been discussed?
Second.
Okay. Then I believe we're ready for a roll call.
Thank you, Council. Councilmember DeFantorum. Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you, council members. Motion passes.
Great. Now we can move on to resource allocation strategy. Becky?
Absolutely. And I will, before Becky kicks it off, I'm just going to make the connection here. This morning, you heard testimony from Emily Lieb at Metro with a few recommendations or requests regarding the recommendation that we put into the Housing Stability Council packet that staff will present to in just a moment. And so I just want to reprise what those recommendations were. And so as you consider giving feedback on the recommendations that we're making, we can be revising the motion to incorporate any feedback around these that you would like to incorporate. One of these recommendations we have at this point held $5 million from the resources that we would put forward to Metro to put to projects, so that OHCS could offer them to projects without Metro bond funds in them through our NOFAs. And Metro has made the request that we reconsider that. As staff will likely address, we had made that recommendation based on feedback from the last council meeting in the introduction regarding whether it is problematic to be holding not allowing access to lift resources for the Metro area to projects that are not connected to those Metro bond funding efforts. The second recommendation was to allow Metro to program these resources into effectively not just Metro bond funded projects, but also the Portland bond funded projects. I don't think that's that would be a very easy change to make. Clearly, it just would, again, with the purview that I would recommend we still have those resources be allocated throughout by Metro as our conduit for programming those resources. And then lastly, they are made an argument to increase the percentage of lift resources to go to the Portland Metro counties. We have programmed or estimated that those resources based on our current lift programmatic structure, where 50% of resources go to rural areas, 25% to large metro areas, 25% to small metro areas. And Becky did a lot of detailed analysis about prior rounds of lift funding and made this estimate based on what we would have ordinarily committed into the Portland metro area. Again, Metro is requesting that to be reconsidered and focus more around population distribution to increase the resources to be put out in this partnership. So those are the points that were raised for public comment. I will at that now hand it off to Becky and the team to talk about the recommendation that we put forth in the memo, and again, any of the recommendations to on that list or otherwise that you would like to have considered. I would encourage us to adapt the motion after staff walk through what we've put forward.
Thank you, Natasha. I did manage to send you the PowerPoint for this one that we put together, which will actually be very helpful because it'll lay out the numbers that we're discussing in a form that would be easier for people to grasp at a glance. So, so welcome back, everybody. Again, for the record, I am Becky Isom, Senior Program Analyst for the Affordable Rental Housing section. I just wanted to introduce myself one more time. So Andrea and I came before you last month with a proposal to connect with Metro and other statewide funding partners to help support 4 goals. Next slide, please. Those goals were to reduce pressure on private activity bond resources, to support creation of 30% units by filling gaps in current and future partner projects, increase and sustain rural development capacity, and utilize local funding processes and funding selection criteria. Next slide, please. A team of OHCS staff with our partners at Metro met in the middle of April to discuss ways that we could collaborate in the future. Based on that discussion, as well as feedback from council members during our April meeting, we have created an updated framework for your review. What you see on the screen right now is what the approved LIFT 2023 NOFA set-asides were. As you can see, we had 2 different paths that people could get funding for. You have the lift with the 4% LIHDC and private activity bonds, and then you have the lift only. We split that in half to give people an opportunity to still come forward with smaller projects that wouldn't need to utilize our private activity bonds, as those are a rare resource coming up here. Next screen, please. As is proposed in April, staff are recommending that we keep the 50% rural set aside and then give 20% of the total 121.4 million as a set aside for the Portland metro region, with the remaining 30% to go to the urban areas outside the Portland metro area. Now, this is how we came up with this bit here. So based on feedback from last session, we didn't expect that there would be a lot of projects that would want to come in to get money without the private activity bonds. So we decided, and next, we put forth on the next, there it is, that we would offer 19.28 million instead of the 24.28 million, and that would leave $5 million in lift only that we could offer with the 2023 lift NOFA. Mostly we wanted to do this just to be fair. You know, we're trying to think about this equitable for the entire state. The 19.28 million would be offered with Metro's fall 2022 funding, and OHCS would not have a Portland Metro set aside in the lift with 4% LIHDC and private activity bond category in 2023. This is how we would leave it all the same. And I can discuss more about this after any questions you guys have at the end of the presentation, after Andrea has a chance to go. Andrea?
Thanks, Becky. Andrea Mathiasen. I manage the home and, thank you, Housing Trust Fund resources. And so this, I do want to just pause for a second and acknowledge a comment that Mary Lee made earlier today about numbers not matching up with the write-up. And so these numbers do not match up with the material in the council packet, but these are accurate and they are more up to date than those numbers based on conversations that we've had with some funding partners. So previously in the current funding calendar, trust fund resources have been aligned with PSH dollars and the PSH NOFA. We did last year have resources that went out that were undersubscribed. So we had a rather large volume that need to be allocated to meet our federal commitment timelines. And so need to get those out the door quickly. And to do that, have reached out to home participating jurisdictions and other funders that use federal resources that can easily use Housing Trust Fund dollars. And so have made a proposed update to the allocation strategy that would provide $7 million to the statewide home, PJ, and other public housing authority projects, and $19 million to Portland Metro projects. As Becky said, we did have a conversation with them late in April and about aligning these resources with projects that they would use their current selection process to identify, and then OHCS would use our regular underwriting criteria as long as the projects did meet programmatic requirements. And so just wanted to share the HTF update, and then I think pause there. There's likely some questions before we move on to the final slide with a motion.
All right, questions or discussion from the council? Councilmember Mena.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, Andrea, for the information. And well, I guess I don't have questions about the HTF. I had more questions about the lift. So I don't know if allocation, if that's okay. I completely understand how the proposed allocation was established based on prior usage, and that makes sense. And this is where I don't disagree with the 50-50% at all. I'm looking at the metro allocation that on the original formula was 25%. And based on this recommendation, which is based on prior usage, that allocation goes down. And so that's not something that I makes sense to me, especially with the amount of projects that are coming through the pipeline in the metro area.
So originally it was not Portland metro area. It's an urban definition, which means any project, anybody that's inside the Portland urban growth boundary and then over 40,000 people. So that you then add in Medford. So 20, we're only at that point, we gave 25% to all of that. So Salem, Medford, all of the urban regions. Now, because we have been getting feedback from our smaller urban areas, that is actually why we made a set aside specifically for our mid-sized urban. We had gotten a lot of feedback over the last couple of years that we were creating another underserved community, and that was our attempt to try to shift things as kind of an experiment. And it actually seems, fingers crossed, it seems we've got some projects in from jurisdictions that we've never really been able to see come in before. So what we ended up doing was we took 20%, we went back to the old way where it was 50% for all of urban and 50% for all of rural. We took how much traditionally that Portland metro area would have gotten. It was approximately 20%. We looked at the initial allocations, the first awards, because we did have all of these other, we would often get extra money that we'd be able to fund everything that was in there. We did not count that because that would mean that Portland Metro was getting more like 100% of the urban money sometimes. And we have to think about the entire state. So that's why we recommended 20% for Portland Metro, 30% for the rest of the urban area. And that includes, so we're getting rid of the mid-sized one for next year, and it would only be urban. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, so I think just to summarize, this urban is really large urban, and this was small urban. So among the large urban, there's Portland Metro plus additional larger jurisdictions, and so and versus the mid-size. So the large urban were a total of 30.2 something, 3 probably, and so of that, saying around 25 million, 24.28 would have gone to the Portland metro area, and then the rest of that large urban money was rolled into this other category.
Thank you for that clarification. One last question, if I may. The $5 million set aside for on the metro side for without bonds, are there any projects that have no bond and 5 million that will fund the 5 million? Okay, I was not aware that there were, so thank you.
Yeah, this is the first time that we've had a bifurcated lift application where we have offered half of the resources to be paired with 4% and half of them without. And we are seeing that there's lift without 4% transactions that are applying for resources. And when we looked at the scheme of those, it's, a 2.5 million per project is kind of an average that we were seeing in this year's. I was at that point in time looking at pre-applications with Becky.
All right, Councilmember Lee. I'm recognizing you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Hall. First of all, I just want to say I appreciate both with this previous item and this item, the reference to the public testimony the content of it and helping us put those two things together. That's very, very helpful. So I just want to say I appreciate that. I have a couple of questions. I am absolutely in support of this 50-50 split. 50 urban and things being, carved out underneath it, and then 50 rural. Because of our commitments to make sure that there is geographic diversity in what we have, and B, because and this is a question, we have in practice, when there are not enough projects to fulfill the amount of money that's been allocated, we move those funds to where there are additional projects. Is that correct? So we have in real time the ability to respond to any changes or unanticipated heavy ask here, heavy ask there, and that goes both ways. So if we have funds on the urban side of things and there are more projects coming in on the rural side, which has never happened. However, that money would go over to fund more rural projects and vice versa. I think it's important to hold the allocation because I think it's sending a message of importance to the community and to the state about this geographic equity piece that we are concerned about. So I absolutely support the 50-50. I support the delineation between the large urban area and the smaller urban areas. I think that all makes lots of sense. And in the moment, we get to make some sausage so that none of the resource goes unspent or unutilized. That makes sense to me. I want to ask us to just consider what are we centering and when are we centering it, right? So at this level of elevation for the allocation, we're centering geographic diversity, right? We, at the rating point of projects, center Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities and other considerations. I would propose that we find some different ways to think about racial justice and equity that's not a consideration of a project proposal. And in alignment with some of the comments from our public testimony today, really thinking about if we're centering the housing of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, then the funds need to go where those people live. And where those people live in large portion is in the Portland metro area. I don't say that because I want us to change this allocation formula. I say that because I want us to think about what are we centering in our policy and when are we centering it. At this moment, our highest articulated priority at this level of the budget allocation is geographic diversity. If that's where we want to land on and saying that's our highest priority, I understand that, and our funding allocation is aligned with that. If we have other priorities, not simply considerations of a proposal, then I think we need to have that discussion of how does that get into this level of discussion. And I don't think it's one to be made today, and I want to put it in there. Two other comments. The first is, like Councilmember Mena, I had the same question of, are there projects that we should be considering that do not have bond money from the Portland metro area? And so I hear you say, yes, there are. And I'd want to know what policy targets are being met by funding projects that do not have that source of support, because it is such a large source of support in the Portland metro area. And if we are indeed funding projects that aren't in alignment with that funding source, I want us to really be clear that it's pushing a policy agenda that isn't going to get met any other way, not just, gosh, it's a good project that didn't get funded. I'd want us to dig into that a little bit. And again, at 5 million, it's not a huge amount of money. I want us to question that. And finally, I like the suggestion about a prioritization for the 30% income and below focus. I think, again, that's another consideration level determination. And we need to figure out where does that consideration level go, particularly as it relates to the Portland metro area and also across the state, right? Are we really trying to get the lowest income folks into housing? Then that needs to be a priority versus a consideration for the type of project and units that someone is proposing to build for us. And again, I support this and we'll vote in favor. Thank you.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
All right. So somebody else started this conversation. I just want you to remember that. Just kidding. So I also support this allocation, the 50-50 split and the 20-30 split. I'm not sure I would support changing it or a different allocation at this stage. However, I do want to point out that we've had multiple conversations about what is the geography of Oregon. We've talked about urban Oregon, large urban Oregon. We've talked about bedroom communities of urban, mid-urban Oregon. We've talked about rural Oregon, and we've also talked about something called frontier Oregon. And I just want to throw that back out on the table. And I don't expect anything to be done, today, but I do want us to think about, now we're talking about the differences between rural and rural. Let's talk about the difference, or urban and urban. Let's talk about the difference between rural and rural, because there are really two very diversely, distinctly different parts of the state. One is rural and one is frontier. And I don't want any of those pieces of the state to not be able to connect with this funding because they lack bandwidth, they don't have the structure. There's all kinds of reasons why, certain portions of the state are not connecting. And I just want us to remember that even though some areas might need a little extra help in getting into these programs because they're very complicated, it's really important that we don't forget that there is a frontier area, many frontier areas in the state of Oregon that some of them are being left behind, and I don't want that to happen.
Thank you so much for that, Council Higginbotham. I really appreciate that feedback. Thank you so much.
Further comment, feedback from the council? Now, just for clarity on my point, and I'm sorry if I'm not there, is this informational only, or I see there is a motion to approve the proposed strategy for allocating lift and housing trust funds? Oh, I see right here.
Yeah,
reading.
yeah, so we are requesting a motion. Staff introduced this last month. We have added to that motion here on the screen, you'll see, and this is tied back to that administrative rule conversation that we had on the front end. Just if there is a barrier in rules, we wanted to make sure that we would be able to implement the needed amendments to support this collaboration with Metro jurisdiction.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, we've got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion and a second. Can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Council. Councilmember DeFontorum. Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you, Council. Motion passes.
All right. Thanks to everyone. And we're on to now home ARP initial input.
Yes, and I'll just hand it to Andrea Mathiasen to do a brief overview.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members. I'm going to start sharing my screen here so that we can do a super quick update on the Home American Rescue Plan, Home ARP funding. And so with that, Andrea Mathiasen, I think I said earlier, I manage the Home and National Housing Trust Fund and now Home ARP resources. I believe I was here talking to you last July of 2021 when OHCS received our allocation from HUD. And I am not able to scroll through here. What is going on? There we go. And so a quick recap for those who just may need a brief refresher. Oregon received approximately 33 million of home ARP resources. That includes a 15% administrative cap as well as a 5% allocation that can be used on capacity building. It's a one-time resource allocation that has to be fully expended by September of 2030. And this is different from the ongoing annual allocation of the regular home resources that we receive, which are approximately 10 million this current year. And as we have for many years in the past, we will use our ongoing annual allocation to support home tenant-based rental assistance resources. So other home PJs in Oregon, which include Portland, Multnomah County, Clackamas County, Washington County, City of Salem, City of Eugene, they have also received their own individual allocations of home ARP that combined total about $32 million in addition to their one-time. Those are one-time, but in addition to their regular home resources. And so when OHCS talks about our plan and our funding priorities, they do not really encompass the funding priorities and the allocation plans of those other home participating jurisdictions. So wanted to make that clarification. Again, as a quick recap, eligible funding beneficiaries include the chronically homeless, not the chronically homeless, apologies for that typo, people who are at risk of homelessness. And those first two bullets really are technical in definition. They use the McKinney-Vento definitions for those two categories. And then individuals fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and then other populations where providing home ARP resources would prevent the family's homelessness or would further stabilize households at greatest risk of housing instability. And then lastly, veterans and families that include a veteran family member are also eligible to receive these resources. The activities that are eligible for funding include two of our typical home activities, which is development of affordable rental housing and tenant-based rental assistance. HUD has added two new categories of eligible funding: supportive services, homeless prevention services, housing counseling, and then also the purchase or development of non-congregate shelter. And wanted to throw a little caveat in there that HUD has decided to prohibit the conversion of non-congregate shelter to permanent housing with these resources. And so we've had some really great thoughts about using these resources to convert project turnkey non-congregate shelters to rental housing, and that is not eligible with these resources. So I wanted to clarify that kind of from the get-go. In order to commit or expend these resources, HUD is requiring OHCS and other home PJs to put together and submit for their review and approval a home ARP allocation plan. It's got a few components to it: a gaps analysis and needs assessment, very robust stakeholder engagement, determination of funding priorities, and then it's got a 15-day public comment period. And so just going to dive into those in a little bit more detail for you. The gaps analysis and needs assessment is being conducted for OHCS by the Portland State University Homeless Research and Action Collaborative, and it will describe, and these are kind of HUD required elements of it, but it will describe the size and demographic composition of those 4 qualifying populations. It's actually 5 that I touched on a few minutes ago. It will describe the unmet housing and service needs of those populations, and then it will describe gaps in the current shelter, housing inventory, and service delivery systems, and it will touch on the available resources to fund those gaps. So we have received that work from PSU. We are just in the phase of finalizing it with them, making sure it's all accurate and descriptive, and that there's no more input internally before we post that on the OHCS Home ARP website. And we will be using that data analysis to inform stakeholder conversation. Wanted to make sure there's no questions about that piece of work before I go on to the next slide. Nope, okay. So HUD, as I said, is requiring some very prescribed stakeholder engagement, which is kind of new for them, but it's really great. They are specifically requiring that OHCS and other home PJs undertaking these allocation plans reach out to continuum of care organizations, public housing authorities, homeless service providers, domestic violence providers, entities that work around fair housing issues. And so those are kind of the required populations at a basic minimum, but obviously in addition to that, OHCS will be reaching out to culturally specific providers, having some conversations with the tribes as well to talk about building capacity to serve their communities with home art resources. And then wanted to touch base very briefly on the process that we are using. We have a couple of different ways for folks to provide input. There will be a survey that will be emailed out very broadly to all of those entities identified above. Then there will be about half a dozen virtual meetings that are convened with those stakeholder groups to highlight eligible activities and beneficiaries and get their thoughts on funding priorities. We know we've got conversations with community action agencies, homeless service providers, PSH providers, and then several of our affordable housing industry groups having those meetings. And then there will be a feedback meeting where OHCS issues a draft of the allocation plan to kind of recap the input we received and share what we gleaned from the feedback in a draft of the allocation plan. And then lastly, HUD is requiring a 15-day public comment period. And as with some of our consolidated planning work, we will be providing in our allocation plan to HUD an accounting of the feedback and the input that was provided and our response to it. And then in the allocation plan, we are required to highlight funding priorities. And so those will reflect conversations that are had with our stakeholders, as well as the data that is taken into consideration. Some of the current dialogue that we have been having most recently with community action agencies, as well as internally, have emphasized using home ARP resources to create additional permanently supportive housing units in our community and to develop the capacity of partners in rural communities to develop those units. And so some of those conversations take into account that OHCS has received significant resources in 2022, including legislative resources and other federal stimulus dollars for both rent assistance, homeless services, as well as non-congregate shelter acquisition and development. And then the fact that these are one-time resources, not necessarily lending themselves well to standing up new programs for rent assistance and services. So that's just wanted to be super transparent that we were having those conversations, and right now that's some of what we're hearing. Not known at this point where things will end up, of course. And then in terms of next steps and timelines, in the next week or so, hopefully that data needs assessment that I talked about will be posted online. We have been and will continue to be having stakeholder engagement conversations April through June. The final public meeting to share a draft of the allocation is scheduled and hopefully will happen in early June, public comment mid-June, and then we anticipate submitting the plan to HUD and getting approval from them, hopefully by early August. They have a 30-day window to review and approve the plan. And I think with that, that wraps up my presentation and wanted to solicit feedback and answer any questions.
Questions or feedback from the council? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, Andrea. I want to just raise the issue of unconditional cash transfer and asset building activities. I think they fit under allowable uses 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. I think they also really lend themselves to a one-time only source of funding for precisely all the reasons you've listed. We might use it to match individual development accounts. We might use it to do some unconditional cash transfer. And PSU folks know this, but there's a lot of recent research about working with populations who are chronically homeless and cash transfer and the positive outcomes that come with that. So there is a lot of both research and I think precedent it's also been a conversation we've been having, and these one-time only dollars, I think, are a perfect opportunity to look at pairing and leveraging some of our existing service systems to move more in an unconditional and cash and asset building focus. So I just would want to encourage us to put some of those ideas into our heads. And as we are producing the, sort of the value proposition or the ideas that we want to test with our community partners, that these be one of whatever else we're going to offer to people. Thank you.
Thanks for calling that out. And this is just for informational purposes.
Further feedback from the council at this time? Hearing none, I'll say thank you, and let's move on to the next item, which I believe is portfolio operations stabilization funds.
Chair Hall?
Yes.
Can I insert myself here? We're 15 minutes over when we thought we would end the meeting.
Yes, we
and
are.
I see that we have several more briefings, which and so it would be helpful for me to check in with all of us for one thing, who can stay later and which of these briefings are the most critical that we need to do. I know we've also already made a decision about the wildfire recovery. Are there others of these briefings that could hold or be conveyed in a different manner? And if not, how can we maintain quorum for the amount of time we need? Thank you.
Yeah, and I will note that Council Member Sandoval has indicated he needs to leave the meeting, and I'd like to hear from Director Bell if what things would be like absolute musts or highly desirable for today, and if there are other things we can push off to a future agenda.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councilmember Lee, and I appreciate that we are 15 minutes over what I know has been a very lengthy schedule. So Director Detweiler-Davie, I know we have a few agenda items on there, some of which are memos for council awareness that don't necessarily need discussion. Which ones can we prioritize, knowing where we're at, knowing that a couple of them, if not critical, and I'll defer to you on that, we'll need to get to move.
Yeah, I will. So yeah, the one remaining item that we were intending to present on today was the introduction of the framework around portfolio operations, with the idea that we are not going to a motion this month, but that would ideally like to move forward with one next month. If needed, we could push this back a month. I think if needed, we could also say that you have the information in the packet, and if anybody has questions, we can take those now or offline so that we're responsive to those as we bring back a recommendation next month. And then the balance of, we have within the packet, we did just have updates on preservation investment allocations from the additional resources allocated in the 22 legislative session, an brief update on the status of the market cost investment, and then 4% update. So those are not prioritized for discussion unless there's items that council would like to engage in right now. So I think if we want to take feedback on portfolio operation stabilization, preservation offline, we can do that.
So Chair Hall, I would submit that there is a plethora of deep information in the memo. And so I would just offer that we can have the council members, if they have not already, but review the material that has been provided. And if there are questions or things that need to be elevated before the item comes back for a formal motion next month, that the council members would do that, and we don't can do that offline between meetings. And I'm also happy to, if the council members have differing of opinion, I'm happy to receive that too.
Can you pull that out of the minutes and just send it to us directly, or out of the packet?
Yeah,
that would be awesome.
I just want to thank you for that, council member. I just want to be clear on what you're asking. So are you asking for staff to send you the extract out the material that we've sent you?
Yes.
Separately? Okay. Okay.
I have to find it in the.
Yeah. I've been fishing, but
fair enough. It is a hefty agenda this month, so I'll give you that. Yeah,
yes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No problem. Okay,
Thank you.
we will proceed accordingly then.
All right, so we're finished with the Affordable Rental Housing Division for now. Anything in the Central Services Division? We were going to have introduction of the new Central Services Administrator. And are we ready for that, or shall we put that over?
Yeah, Chair Hall, thank you for that. If you, as noted in the packet, this is not prioritized for a conversation. So there is informational content provided, and we will be bringing that as a future item.
Okay. So is there any more business to come before the council at this day and time?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Kind of a random question. I don't know if this probably for Andrea. I was just curious about the special session funding. Has all of that been allocated? Are we not? Where are we at on that? I'm sorry. There's so much money that's gone through the system. I've kind of lost track. Can you just give me a quick overview?
No, I appreciate that, Councilmember Higginbotham, and I think Chair Hall alluded to it, but it bears repeating that we have been fortunate here in Oregon that we've received significant amount of funding from both special session and short session. So a significant portion of that funding is either out the door or on its way out the door, particularly with the eviction prevention services. Knowing that we are over in time, council member, what I can commit to doing is following up with council members on a detailed account of the status of each. We already have that material together anyway, so I can send that over to you without much burden on our team, and we're happy to bring that. And then of course, if there are questions that council members have, or if there is an interest in us providing a briefing or an update at one of the future meetings, we're happy to do that, but I can send that out as a follow-up today.
That would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, council or staff, any further loose ends to tie up? Things we want to remember for follow-up between meetings or at the next meeting? Well, hearing none, I think we're at the stage. We're a few minutes over, but time to call it a day for our May meeting, and we'll see you all in June, what we hope will be a warmer and drier June, but who knows, this being our beloved Oregon. See you next time.
We have sunshine today, so bye.
Bye.